Hey everyone, welcome back. Chapters 871 through 880 of the previous episode. Disguised as a naive scholar, Jian Lai follows two kind sisters to a haunted temple, secretly weakening the vicious ghosts for them. When their treacherous allies betray them, he summons a ghost to devour the traitors, purifies it with his flying sword, and departs as a dazzling sword immortal. If possible, you can support me via PayPal, or become a channel member to help me keep this channel running. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 881, Radiant Lights. To the north of the Locust Flower Nation was the deity-visaged nation, the latter of which was a Buddhist haven, filled with countless monasteries. While at the border pass, Jian Lai had collected another stamp on his passport, and he would flip it open to take a look whenever he had the chance. His current passport was a new one that had been arranged for him by Wei Bo. His previous passport was already completely covered in stamps, and it had been left in the bamboo building. He was in his usual getup, holding a hiking pole in his hand, wearing a conical bamboo hat, while carrying a bamboo bookcase on his back. He traveled on his own, occasionally taking an aerial route via flying sword, but always choosing to walk through mortal cities. At the moment he still had a long way to go until he reached the Spring Dew Garden that was home to Song Lanqiao. On the way from the Silver Screen Nation to the border of the deity-visaged nation, Jian Lai had encountered many southbound spirits, but aside from that one occasion where he had sprung into battle in the ritual Baton Prefecture, he had chosen to passively observe from afar on all other occasions, finally beginning to display some of the lofty detachment befitting a cultivator. Ever since leaving the malicious Ghost Valley, he had begun focusing wholeheartedly on practicing his six-step walking meditation, planning to reach the milestone of 2 million repetitions before thinking about anything else. If he hadn't encountered that group of 4 demon slayers earlier, Jian Lai's original plan would have been to slay all of the ghosts on his own, then stay for an additional few days at the Golden Bell Monastery, during which time he would ask about the golden Sanskrit text on the azure pages of the scripture. Of course, he would break the text down into parts and ask the monk about them on multiple separate occasions. The text didn't contain many characters, only 260 in total, and there were some repeated characters used, so it shouldn't take long to decipher the entire script. The allure of wealth was always prone to bringing out the worst in people, as had been the case for the martial artist master and disciple duo of the Golden Bell Monastery, so precautions had to be taken. After passing through 2 of the deity-visaged nation's southern cities, Jian Lai noticed that there were many wandering monks in the area. They were all very thin and emaciated, trudging along with bowls in their hands, surviving off the generosity of others. Upon encountering one such traveling monk, Jian Lai would raise a hand vertically in front of his own chest to extend a Buddhist salute. Not only was the deity-visaged nation rife with monks and monasteries, martial artists were also extremely common here. On this day, Jian Lai encountered a party of armed escorts traveling toward the north in a yellow desert. Their camel-drawn wagons were packed with the goods that they were escorting, and hanging from the camels were tinkling camel bells. All of the male armed escorts were very physically imposing, and the female ones had dark complexions and a heroic aura about them, displaying a different sense of beauty than what was regarded to be conventional and traditional. A young man on horseback spotted Jian Lai, whose white robe was laden with yellow sand, and much of it had gotten into his hair as well. He was trudging along arduously against the wind, and the convoy was quickly leaving him behind. The young man tugged on his reins to slow his steed, then bent down to pick up a water pouch hanging from his saddle as he smiled and asked, "Do you have enough water on you? You'll still have to travel over 50 kilometers to get out of this yellow wind valley. If you don't have enough water, then feel free to take this." Jian Lai turned to the young man, then smiled as he pointed at the sword nurturing gourd hanging from his waist and replied, "It's fine, I have water in this gourd and a water pouch in my bamboo bookcase." The young man returned the water pouch to its original place on his saddle, then said, "It's extremely cold in the Yellow Wind Valley at night, and there's been more and more unrest popping up everywhere of late. A lot of dirty things have entered the world, and that's why so many monks have been coming out of all of the major monasteries in recent times. I suggest you do your best to keep up with us, and ideally you should spend the night beside Mute Lake up ahead. Where there are gatherings of people, there will be an abundance of yang energy, and we'll all be able to look out for one another." Many spirits often come to wreak havoc in this area at night, and I can assure you those are not just tall tales, so make sure you don't end up on your own. Having said that, there's no need to be overly afraid. There are many eminent monks and Vedantas staying in the Yellow Wind Valley, residing in thatched huts and reciting Buddhist scriptures, so even if malicious spirits do emerge, they may not dare to hurt anyone. Thank you for your cautionary words. I'll be sure to reach Mute Lake by nightfall, Chen Ping'an said with a grateful nod. The Deity Visage Nation wasn't within the territory that encompassed the dozen or so nations including the Silver Screen Nation and the Locust Flower Nation. Hence, the mortal citizens and martial artists of the Deity Visage Nation were already accustomed to seeing ghosts and spirits. In the southeastern region of the northern complete reed continent, spirits and humans had already been commingling for countless years, and there were many proposed ideas in the Deity Visage Nation's imperial court on the matter of how to deal with these ghosts and spirits. However, after the storyteller from the Blissful Dream Nation removed the restrictive formation, spiritual energy had gushed into the dozen or so nations. The cultivators on the border were the first to detect this phenomenon, and the ghosts and spirits weren't slow to react either. Just as merchants flocked to wealth, ghosts and spirits were instinctively drawn to spiritual energy, thereby resulting in the phenomena in the ornate headpiece prefecture and the ritual baton prefecture of the Locust Flower Nation, which was a result of the mass migration of ghosts and spirits from the Deity Visage Nation. This was the growing unrest that the young man had spoken of. Chen Ping'an continued onward at a moderate pace, and as the sun began to set, he arrived at the small, green lake that was, for some reason, referred to as Mute Lake by the locals. There were already several groups of people gathered there, and campfires had been lit, while wine was being drunk to ward off the cold. That night, several streaks of sword light appeared from the west, then raced into the Yellow Wind Valley like a flurry of shooting stars. They descended several dozen kilometers away from Mute Lake, and a chorus of ghostly howls instantly rang out. A few minutes later, the streaks of radiant sword light raced away into the distance, but during this time, all of the people gathered on the bank of Mute Lake remained as composed as ever, continuing to drink and engage in festivities while discussing among themselves which sect they thought those passing swordsmen were from. Even after the swordsmen were long gone and it was already very late at night, very few of the people by the lake retired for the night to rest. There were even still some children battling it out with wooden sabers and bamboo swords, chasing after another amid peals of tender laughter. Chen Ping'an was sitting by the lake, leaning back against his bamboo bookcase while drinking treasure mirror mountain stream water from his sword-nurturing gourd. He spotted a woman wearing a veiled hat leaving her group on her own before crouching down by the lake to wash her face. She raised a hand, and there was a string of white bells around her wrist. By the time she lifted a corner of her veil, Chen Ping'an had already withdrawn his gaze before redirecting it toward Mute Lake, which was said to have been very deep. According to legends, the lake hadn't dried out even once in the past 1,000 years. Even during multi-year-long droughts, the water level didn't drop a single inch, nor did the water level rise in the slightest even under the most torrential of rainfall. All of a sudden, a series of faint ripples appeared over the center of the lake. A black spot emerged, looking around in a discreet fashion before quickly ducking back down into the water. The woman remained seemingly completely oblivious, carefully washing her face and smoothing down her hair. Each time she raised her hand, the bells around her wrist would tinkle and chime, but the sound was drowned out by the sound of the festivities on the bank. Right at this moment, a massive vortex appeared silently over the surface of the lake, following which an inky black fish monster that was over 100 feet in length abruptly leaped out from within. It opened its mouth up wide, revealing a set of sharp and jagged teeth as it pounced on the woman. Chen Ping'an remained seated on the spot as he watched from afar with his chin resting on his hand. 8 people appeared around Mute Lake in 8 different directions in unison, and each of them was holding a compass that they slammed into the sand beneath them. They then began making a string of hand seals while taking a series of astral steps, each releasing a silver line that shot forth toward the center of the lake. The 8 silver lines met at a certain point on the surface of the lake, and a radiant silver 8 trigrams formation that outshone even the moon instantly took shape. The 8 figures were displaying flawless teamwork, and they seemed to have been taught by the same master or at least had come from the same sect. Each of them reached out with one hand to wrench a silver line out of the compasses on the ground, then joined their middle and index fingers before pointing them into the air above the center of the lake. 8 more silver lines shot forth to form a cage, following which the 8 figures began to revolve in a circle, adding more and more curved rungs to the cage. As for the woman who had to face the fish monster all on her own, the 8 figures didn't appear to be concerned for her safety at all. The fish monster had already sensed that something wasn't right as soon as the compasses struck the ground, and it immediately closed its mouth, but it was unable to arrest its own momentum and continued crashing toward the woman in the bamboo hat. As opposed to running for cover, the woman sprang high up into the air to meet the monster, then slammed it down into the 8 trigrams formation on the surface of the lake with an almighty punch. As soon as the fish monster's enormous body came into contact with the center of the formation, a small mountain instantly came crashing down onto its head, sending it hurtling toward another part of the formation. Once there, it was struck by a barrage of lightning that caused it to spasm uncontrollably. As it continued to be tossed around in the formation, it was subjected to an array of different elemental attacks, including seas of fire and storms of lightning spikes. In the end, it transformed into a little girl in black and began fleeing for its life, bawling into its hands as tears came streaming down its face. Occasionally, it was struck by a bolt of lightning that rooted it to the spot and caused it to spasm uncontrollably, and in between the lightning strikes, it was having to constantly evade falling mountains, pouncing fiery dragons, and volleys of ice spikes. Chen Ping'an was beginning to feel a little sorry for the fish monster, and he averted his gaze slightly while also closing one eye. He had witnessed more than his fair share of malicious spirits, and regardless of the ultimate fate that befell them, all of them appeared like almighty beings of unfathomable power when they first appeared. A prime example was Fan Yun Luo of Meticulous Skin City, and even the spirit that had been locked in a confrontation against the ghosts of Copper Stench City had a bunch of lackeys at its beck and call. All of the people gathered by the lake were cheering loudly while chugging down wine, thoroughly enjoying the show being put on by the 8 immortals. The children had been quite fearful of the initial form that the fish monster had appeared in, but all of that fear quickly evaporated as the fish monster was reduced to a sniveling little girl. The most prized form of entertainment in the deity visage nation was watching immortals capture demons, and it was an occasion more celebrated and festive than even the spring festival. The little girl was doing her best to remain a foot above the 8 trigrams formation on the surface of the lake, but at the moment, she was being crushed under a round log that had roughly the same circumference as a well. Unable to evade the falling log, she was forced to raise her hands above her head to keep it at bay, and tears and snot were flowing down her face as she sniveled. "Those bells belong to me. I gave them to a passing scholar who was on the verge of death. He told me that he was traveling to the capital for the imperial examinations, and that he didn't have any money left, so I gave him those bells. He promised to return them, but it's been over 100 years since then, and he still hasn't come back. He's a liar." This sounded like an absurd story, but Chen Ping'an believed her. Mute Lake most likely had this fish monster to thank for the stability of its water level throughout the years, regardless of the conditions. Furthermore, all those who had spent the night at the lake had been able to do so safely without suffering any injuries and casualties, and they had the fish monster to thank for that as well. Regardless of what her reasons were for protecting everyone, all those who had benefited from her protection throughout the years should have been thankful to her. However, the stereotypical image of a demon like herself was that she had to have been a malicious creature eager to harm humans, so everyone was jubilant at the sight of her being captured by these immortals. From the moment that the fish monster emerged from the lake, Chen Ping'an had immediately detected a complete lack of malice and killing intent in her. He could tell that she was only interested in that string of bells, and that she had no interest in harming anyone. As for the woman in the veiled hat, Chen Ping'an had already seen right through her hidden identity as a 5th-tier martial artist, or was it the 6th tier in the deity visage nation? In any case, it was in light of all of these factors that Chen Ping'an had chosen to remain a passive bystander. However, what he failed to anticipate was that the bracelet of bells worn by the woman in the veiled hat had once belonged to the fish monster. In the face of the sniveling little girl, the woman in the veiled hat smiled as she stood on the bank of the lake and said, "Don't worry, we're not capturing you to kill you. We're here under the orders of the Imperial Preceptor of the Tug-Rope Nation. They're missing a river guardian over there, and the Imperial Preceptor thinks you'd be perfect for the role. Hence, He wants you to go to the Tugrope Nation to preside over the water fortune there. This is a good opportunity for you, but I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that there are no risks involved. As a water monster, you have a natural affinity for water, so your chances of successfully forging a godly body to become a river guardian will be much higher than those of a deceased human. However, it's still not a sure thing. I understand that capturing you by force like this is a little cruel, but it can't be helped. We've been allies of the Tugrope Nation's imperial court for generations, and we've received a large sum of immortal currency from the Imperial Preceptor Office as compensation for capturing you. As for the scholar that you gifted these bells to, I regret to inform you that not only did he have no intention of returning these bells, he made them a prized treasure of his clan instead and passed them down for generations. These bells were gifted to the Tugrope Nation Imperial Preceptor in exchange for a promotion, as well as a posthumous title for his ancestor. If you want to curse him, you can do as you please once you become a river guardian, but for now, I suggest you surrender to spare yourself from further suffering. Despite the little girl's best efforts, she continued to be slowly forced down by the log above her, and right as feet were about to make contact with the 8 trigrams formation down below, she sobbed, "You're going to kill me. All of you are bad people who only know how to fight and kill others. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home and I like it here. I don't want to become some river guardian." The woman in the veiled hat heaved a faint sigh, then gestured to the 8 immortals to stand down before offering, "How about this? I can tell the Imperial Preceptor that you don't want to go to the Tugrope Nation, and I'll return his payment for capturing you. However, you have to come back with me to my sect. I can't have come all this way for nothing. If I go back empty-handed, my master will not be happy with me. There's a river near our sect that harbors a river god. You can go there and see what being a river god is all about, and if you change your mind someday and decide that being a river guardian wouldn't be so bad, after all, I can take you to the Imperial Preceptor office. What do you think?" The little girl nodded in response. The woman in the veiled hat made a hand seal while chanting an incantation, and she demonstrated that she was also able to control spiritual energy as she removed the log above the little girl. Having been freed from the oppressive log, the little girl jumped up and down on the spot a few times, following which her eyes began to dart around in a calculating manner. "Don't try to run away," the woman in the veiled hat warned with a smile. "Otherwise, you could end up as braised fish or grilled fish if you're not careful." The little girl's expression instantly crumpled as she sniveled. "Just kill me then. I'd rather die than leave this place." The woman in the veiled hat was at a slight loss for what to do, while the 8 immortals were all looking on in amusement. All of a sudden, a streak of dazzling sword light appeared on the distant horizon, and it arrived on the scene in the blink of an eye. A young swordsman in a light purple Dao robe was hovering above everyone atop a flying sword, and there was a golden hairpin in his hair that was intermittently flashing with arcs of lightning. The young swordsman smiled as he praised, "This little demon has proven very difficult to capture, so you've accomplished an impressive feat here. I'll take her. How much do you want for her?" "You must be young Master Jian of the Golden Crow Palace, right?" the woman in the veiled hat asked. "That's right," the young swordsman replied with a smile. "My apologies, but I can't sell her to you, young Master Jian," the woman said with a shake of her head. The young swordsman's brows furrowed slightly as he insisted, "I'll pay double the price that you were paid to capture her. My mistress just so happens to be missing a personal maidservant." The woman hesitated momentarily, then shook her head yet again as she said, "I'm afraid I can't comply. My master already promised her to the Imperial Preceptor of the Tugrope Nation, so I can't make this decision." The mistress of the Golden Crow Palace was an extremely cruel woman, and her bonded item was a ghost-striking whip crafted from the green bamboo of Azure Divine Mountain. She had a penchant for whipping her maidservants to death, and all of her maidservants had perished with the exception of an old woman who had been with her ever since she was a child. Furthermore, she would throw the bodies of her deceased maidservants into the lightning clouds above the Golden Crow Palace, so that they could never enter the cycle of reincarnation. Having said that, the Golden Crow Palace wasn't some evil sect. They put in just as much effort as anyone into slaying demons and eliminating fiends, and they were also picking out particularly formidable ghost kings and fierce demons as their targets. The master of the Golden Crow Palace was a golden courtier swordsman, yet he was renowned for being fearful of his wife, who was the daughter of the great mountain lord. Hence, none of the female cultivators and maidservants of the Golden Crow Palace dared to speak to the palace master at all unless it was absolutely necessary. However, this seal wasn't completely out of the question. Both the woman's sect and the Tugrope Nation Imperial Preceptor most likely wouldn't be opposed to the idea of selling a favor to the almighty Golden Crow Palace. The young swordsman raised an eyebrow as he harumphed. I tried to be civilized, but you won't listen. Do I have to draw my sword to make you comply? You're nothing more than a 6th-tier martial artist from the Azure Stone residence with a few talismans up your sleeve. If you cross me, I'll slice your face into ribbons, then buy that little demon from you by force. Rest assured, I'll still buy her from you. But from this day forth I, Jian, will remember your Azure Stone residence. The woman in the veiled hat could only heave a resigned internal sigh. At this point, she had no choice but to hand over the little girl. Cultivators of the Golden Crow Palace had always been very unpredictable, and once they decided to be unreasonable, they could be very difficult to deal with indeed, so the woman couldn't allow her actions to endanger her entire sect. She turned to look at the little girl, who had her face her hands, and right as she was about to relent and agree to hand her over to Jian, Chan Ping'an slowly rose to his feet with a smile as he said, "If you were always going to resort to threats of violence, then what was the point of verbal negotiation to begin with? This was always going to be a contest of who had the harder fists anyway. So why bother to take off your pants before you fart?" The little girl in black raised her head with a confused expression. Why do you have to take off your pants before you fart? Isn't that redundant? Precisely, Chan Ping'an declared with a wide smile. The little girl also began grinning from ear to ear as she sat in midair with her arms and legs crossed and remarked, "You scholars really are a funny bunch." However, she then thought of the scholar that had taken her bells and never fulfilled his promise to return them, and her expression instantly soured again. They're all liars. He's just pretending to be nice. The scholar that she had lent the bells to had proclaimed that his ultimate pursuit in life wasn't to become a powerful official. Instead, it was to write a riveting monster novel. He had promised to dedicate an entire chapter to her, one that was extremely long and embellished. He had even already thought of a name for the chapter, The Great Water Monster of Mute Lake. The little girl was virtually salivating at such an exciting prospect, and she requested him to make his depiction of her as menacing and powerful as possible, a request that the scholar had readily agreed to. However, even the bells had returned, yet the chapter that she had been waiting for eagerly for over a century was still nowhere to be seen. At this point, she wouldn't mind even if the chapter were a little shorter and painted her in a little less of a flattering light. Jian looked down at Chan Ping'an and sneered. "What are you two supposed to be, a duet? Putting on a little show, are we?" Chan Ping'an cupped his fist in a salute as he implored. "Please spare her, young Master Jian." Yet another streak of sword light raced onto the scene, then drew to a halt beside Jian, and this flying sword was carrying a middle-aged female cultivator with an exquisite figure. She took a glance at the unfolding scene on the lake, then smiled as she said, "I know you're in a bad mood because we were unable to kill Patriarch Yellow Wind under the watch of our junior uncle, but don't take your anger out on others. Junior uncle is still waiting for you over there, and it would be rude to keep him waiting longer than necessary." Jian nodded as he pointed a finger at the woman in the veiled hat and said, "The Azure Stone residence, right? I'll remember the name. Expect a visit from me soon." Chan Ping'an was putting on a show of discreetly wiping some sweat from his forehead, but he immediately stopped what he was doing as soon as Jian turned his gaze back to him, and to make himself appear more composed, he opened his folding fan and began casually fanning himself. "Don't act all scared now, I know you're also a cultivator," Jian chuckled. "The robe you're wearing is a Dao robe, is it not? Tell me your name and your sect if you dare." "My name is Chan Howren," Chan Ping'an declared with a smile. "One?" Jian expression instantly darkened as he said to the middle-aged woman beside him, "He's asking for it, senior sister. Let me at him. I'll be satisfied with just a single sword strike. Our junior uncle may be watching us," the middle-aged woman warned in a quiet voice. Jian turned his gaze back to Chan Ping'an, then harumphed coldly, "You better go pray to Buddha that our paths never cross again." With that, the two Golden Crow Palace cultivators departed atop their flying swords, leaving two long trails of sword light behind them. The 8 Azure Stone residents had already gathered around the woman in the veiled hat, and they heaved a collective sigh of relief as the two streaks of sword light vanished into the distance. However, they knew that the ordeal wasn't over yet, given that Jian Yu had promised to give them a visit at some point in the near future. In particular, the woman in the veiled hat was feeling particularly concerned. The 9 of them then turned to Chen Ping'an with grateful looks on their faces. He had stepped forward to draw some of Jian Yu's wrath to himself. Otherwise, the 9 of them would have had to bear the full brunt of his fury, and a battle would have perhaps been unavoidable. The Azure Stone residence was inferior in power to the Golden Crow Palace, but not to such an extent that the cultivators of the Azure Stone residence would have to kneel down and beg for mercy. In any case, this had been quite an unfortunate outing. The Azure Stone residence was more than prepared for a visit from Jian Yu, but there was inevitably going to be some bad blood between the Azure Stone residence and the Golden Crow Palace from here onward. The woman in the veiled hat smiled as she cupped her fist in a salute and said, "Greetings, young Master Chan, my name is Mao Qiulu, and I come from the Azure Stone residence of the Peace Branch Nation, situated to the northeast of the Deity Visage Nation. Thank you for speaking up just now. I didn't speak up for your sake, I just wanted to purchase that Mute Lake water monster from you," Chen Ping'an said with a smile. The little girl immediately crossed her arms in displeasure and yelled, "That's great water monster to you. Why weren't you referring to yourself as a great water monster in the presence of that Golden Crow Palace sword immortal?" Chen Ping'an asked with an amused smile. I had an itch in my throat just now, so I was unable to speak," the little girl explained. "Get that trash sword immortal from Golden Crow Palace to come back again, and I'll say it to his face." Before she had a chance to finish, a streak of golden light that stretched for over 10,000 feet in length appeared in the distant sky, hurtling toward somewhere deep within the Yellow Wind Valley. Chen Ping'an took a glance at the streak of golden light through narrowed eyes before averting his gaze. It was a golden courtier swordsman. It seemed that the junior uncle spoken of by the pair of Golden Crow Palace cultivators had gotten personally involved. After that, the streak of sword light slowly faded away, and the little girl hurriedly threw her arms over her own head in a fearful display as she yelled, "I'm just a tiny little water monster. No bigger than a grain of rice." The woman in the veiled hat turned to an old man beside her with a wry smile as she said, "We'll be in trouble if he comes after us." The old man shook his head with a carefree smile as he said, "While that sword immortal can be rather cold and unapproachable, he's not at all like Jian Yu. He never uses his power to show off and oppress others, and he only ever leaves his sect to slay demons and eliminate fiends as a means of cleansing his sword. I'm assuming he's come to keep an eye on Jian Yu and his senior sister on this occasion. After all, Patriarch Yellow Wind is a seasoned golden courtier cultivator who excels in movement techniques, and one could easily perish by his hands if they're not careful. In the wake of that sword strike, I bet he wouldn't dare to rear his ugly head and eat any more monks for at least the next few decades." Mao Qiulu turned to Chen Ping'an and shook her head as she said, "The Imperial Preceptor Office has spent an exorbitant sum for the capture of this demon, and on top of that, Jian Yu of the Golden Crow Palace has also become involved in this matter, so it would be too dangerous for me to hand her off to you. Our Azure Stone residence isn't as powerful as the Golden Crow Palace, but we captured this Mute Lake water monster first, so at least we're in the right, and we don't have to be overly fearful of the Golden Crow Palace." Chen Ping'an closed his folding fan and tucked it under his belt, then smiled and said, "It's fine. I've been saving up money for a long time so I could spend money to my heart's content on this trip. Go ahead and state your price, esteemed immortal Mao. I am just a vagrant cultivator with no roots or ties to anyone or any place, so even if the Golden Crow Palace wants to come after me, they'll have to find me first. As long as you're willing to sell her to me, I'm happy to take her off your hands." "I don't want to be sold to you," the little girl protested in a furious manner. "You scholars are all rotten to the core. I would rather go to the Azure Stone residence with Big Sister Mao here. I'll get to be neighbors with a river god, and perhaps they'll give me some good stuff to eat from time to time. Are you not afraid of that sword immortal from the Golden Crow Palace anymore?" Chen Ping'an asked with an amused smile. "If he uncovers your whereabouts, you'll have to live in constant fear of being captured by him. Is that something you can handle?" The little girl's brows furrowed tightly as she began to think long and hard about this problem. The degree to which her brows were furrowed was always a direct indication of how hard she was thinking about something. "State your price," Chen Ping'an repeated as he turned to the group of Azure Stone residents cultivators. Mao Qiulu turned to the old man with an inquisitive gaze, and the latter gave a slight nod. However, she still asked in a careful manner, "Are you really not afraid of retaliation from the Golden Crow Palace, young Master Chan?" "I'll just have to avoid them," Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. A slightly troubled look appeared on Mao Qiulu's face as she said, "But the Imperial Preceptor Office has offered an entire grain rain coin for her capture. Normally, it wouldn't take so much, but the Imperial Preceptor wishes to instate her as a river guardian, so he spent a little extra on her." "What? Only 1 grain rain coin? Not 100? How dare he?" the little girl raged. "You there. Give her 100 grain rain coins right this instant. If you hesitate for even a moment, you're a weak-willed coward." Chen Ping'an paid no heed to the furious little water monster as he handed over a grain rain coin. "Are you sure you want to do this, young Master Chen?" Mao Qiulu asked in a concerned manner. Right at this moment, an emaciated old monk drifted onto the scene, standing atop the summit of the hill, and he was followed by a group of around a dozen monks of different ages. All of them were wearing prayer beads crafted from ordinary materials around their necks, but the beads were glowing with golden light, making them particularly eye-catching in the night. "That Golden Crow Palace Sword Immortal has already departed," the old monk declared. "Patriarch Yellow Wind has sustained severe injuries, and he seems to have been driven into a frenzied state. Not only has he not gone into hiding to rest and recuperate, he's come out to eat people instead. My uncle Master is already facing off against him several kilometers away, but he won't be able to contain him for long. All of you come with us and leave this Yellow Wind Valley right away. Time is of the essence, so do not delay." Chen Ping'an tossed the grain rain coin at Mao Qiulu with a smile and said, "Now that the deal's been done, we can all leave." Mao Qiulu caught the grain rain coin, then examined it momentarily to confirm that it was indeed an authentic grain rain coin. "Don't forget the bells," the little water monster yelled in an urgent voice. "Buy those from her for a grain rain coin as well." Chen Ping'an continued to ignore her, leaving her to pout in displeasure. Mao Qiulu smiled as she removed the bracelet of bells from her wrist, then handed them over to Chen Ping'an, who she was still yet to identify as a chi refiner. The old man beside her swept a sleeve through the air, and the 8 trigrams formation on the surface of the lake instantly came together like a giant silver net, forcibly transporting the little girl to the shore, while the other Azure Stone residents cultivators retrieved the 8 compasses. "Make sure to keep a close eye on her, young Master Chan. We're going to withdraw the formation. Take care that you don't let her flee into the lake," Mao Qiulu cautioned. "Of course," Chen Ping'an replied with a smile and a nod. The formation instantly faded away, and Chen Ping'an stepped forward before lifting the little girl up by the back of her collar, suspending her in midair as she crossed her arms with a displeased expression. Meanwhile, all of the people gathered in the valley were quickly packing up their belongings before hurriedly fleeing the scene, escorted by the monks. The Azure Stone residents cultivator strode over to join the monks of the deity-visaged nation, clearly intending to help them evacuate everyone from the valley. "You there! The armed escort!" Chen Ping'an yelled. A young armed escort riding on a horse turned around to look at him. While continuing to carry the little girl with one hand, Chen Ping'an conjured up a wine flagon in his other hand, then hurled it toward the young man on the horse, aiming his throw with such exceptional accuracy, and the young man merely had to reach out a hand on horseback to catch the flagon. After stowing the flagon away, the young man smiled and cupped his fist toward Chen Ping'an in a grateful salute. "You're not coming with us, young Master Chen?" Mao Qiulu asked. Chen Ping'an smiled as he replied, "I'll go in some other direction. Patriarch Yellow Wind will definitely choose to go after a large group like yours, rather than a lone straggler like myself." Mao Qiulu was so infuriated to hear this that she was at a complete loss for words, and she raised a thumb in his direction, then slowly turned it upside down. Chen Ping'an remained unfazed as he called, "I'll be sure to visit your Azure Stone residence when I get the chance." Mao Qiulu stoically ignored him as she departed without another word. The little girl swayed her head back and forth in a display of schadenfreude as she jeered. "You scholars are so stupid. She was feeling a bit of affection for you after what you did, but you've completely turned her against you now." Chen Ping'an released the back of her collar, lowering her to the ground. Despite your appearance, you seem to have a lot of life experience, Chen Ping'an chuckled. The little girl clasped her hands behind her back and fixed her gaze on the string of bells in Chen Ping'an's hand. Chen Ping'an tossed the bells to her, then put on his conical bamboo hat before hoisting the large bamboo bookcase onto his back. The little girl was completely stunned by this turn of events, and her little face scrunched up like a piece of paper, reflecting the extent of her befuddlement. What are you doing? You think I can't get away? How dare you look down on me? I'm a great water monster. Get out of here, Chen Ping'an shooed as he shoved her back with a finger to the forehead. Hey, watch it, the little girl snapped. She opened her mouth up wide to reveal a set of bright and sharp teeth, then asked in as threatening a voice as she could muster. Are you scared of me? Terrified, Chen Ping'an replied flatly as he slowly made his way toward the hill. The commotion to the north of the hill was growing louder and louder. The little girl hesitated momentarily, then casually tossed the string of bells into the lake. She then pinched her own chin and began pondering something with her brows tightly furrowed, watching as Chen Ping'an made his way up the hill. All of a sudden, she turned to swagger back toward the lake, then abruptly drew to a halt before turning around, only to discover that Chen Ping'an had already made it to the summit of the hill, and he continued to walk away without even so much as a single backward glance. The little girl scratched her head vigorously, unable to make sense of the situation. She leaped into the water, where she reverted back to her fish monster form, then began pursuing the sinking string of bells into the depths of the lake. Over on the hill, Chen Ping'an walked for a few kilometers before coming to a stop, then removed his conical bamboo hat and bamboo bookcase. An old monk was seated on the ground not far away, his entire body soaked in blood. He was silently reciting a Buddhist scripture, and there was a cockra plunged into the sand beside him, the rings on which were clanging together incessantly. 1. The monk's blood was a golden color, and a series of golden lotus flowers were constantly blooming around him with his scripture recitation. Swirling around the old monk was a yellow tornado, with just a barely visible yellow robe concealed within it. The petals of the golden lotus flowers were constantly being stripped away by the raging tornado, and even though the monk's eyes remained closed, he could sense that someone had appeared behind him. He swept a sleeve through the air as he urged, "Get out of here. Grab onto my staff. It'll help you get far away from this place." The cockra immediately flew toward Chen Ping'an at the old monk's behest before drawing to a halt in midair beside him, and its rings continued to clang together insistently, as if it were urging Chen Ping'an to grab onto it so that he could get away from this place. In the absence of the cockra, the old monk's powers were diminished, and the yellow tornado instantly seized the upper hand, eradicating almost all of the golden lotus flowers in the blink of an eye. Right as the old monk was about to be completely overwhelmed by the tornado, a warm voice rang out beside his ears. "Don't worry about me. Please focus on your recitation. I am honored to be able to hear your wise words." Chen Ping'an then sprang forward over 100 feet in a single step as he yelled, "Come!" The bamboo bookcase sprang open on its own, and a golden demon-binding chain shot out from within before hurtling into the tornado like a golden flood dragon, then wrapped itself tightly around the yellow robe. Immediately thereafter, Chen Ping'an sprang into the fray, unleashing a barrage of almighty punches. Despite the tremendous power that he was unleashing, often able to snap the entire tornado into two with just a single blow, he appeared very relaxed and casual, as if he were simply taking a stroll in the park. The old monk slowly opened his eyes, then smiled as he brought his palms together and murmured to himself, "If only I had some tea with which to treat this esteemed guest." The yellow tornado had already fled into the distance, with Chen Ping'an in hot pursuit. The old monk slowly rose to his feet and made his way to the bamboo bookcase, where he retrieved his cockra before departing. That day, in the darkness of the night, Chen Ping'an was slowly walking along. A little girl was hanging from his leg with her arms wrapped tightly around his ankle, resembling a weighted shackle. "You're just going to keep clinging to me like this?" Chen Ping'an asked without even lowering his head. Slung across the little girl's shoulders was a cloth pouch, and she nodded as she replied, "This pouch contains all of the treasures on the lake bed, and they have to be worth more than a rain coin. I'll give them all to you, but you have to help me find a scholar that can write novels, then get him to write a story about me. making sure that I appear as menacing and terrifying in the story as possible. If you keep this up, I'll have to remove you by force, Chen Ping'an sighed in an exasperated manner. The little girl immediately erupted into tears, wiping her tears and snot on Chen Ping'an's pant leg as she sobbed. Please just take me with you. You're so powerful. Even Patriarch Yellowsan was no match for you. I won't have to worry about anything if I'm with you. I have to find that scholar and get him to write my story. I have to make it known to everyone that I am the almighty water monster of Mute Lake. Let go, Chen Ping'an said in a firm voice as she stopped in his tracks. No! The little girl stubbornly refused as she continued to cling to Chen Ping'an's leg with all her might. Get out of here! Chen Ping'an raised his leg forcefully, and the little girl was sent flying directly toward Mute Lake, tumbling through the air in a massive arc. Mere moments later, Chen Ping'an turned back to discover the little girl tailing him from a distance. As soon as their eyes met, she immediately stopped in her tracks and began looking up at the moon, pretending as if this were nothing more than a chance encounter. If you follow me, you could end up dead, Chen Ping'an sighed. The little girl began eagerly rushing toward him, only to hurriedly stop in her tracks at the sight of his displeased expression. Everyone dies at some point anyway, so I'm not afraid of death. I just want everyone to know of me. Once I accomplish that goal, I wouldn't mind even if I died. Chen Ping'an continued onward, while the little girl continued to follow. All of a sudden, something caught her interest, and she crouched down to stare intently at something on the ground, then abruptly opened her mouth to swallow a lizard whole. Delicious, she declared with a wide smile as she stood back up again, only to discover Chen Ping'an looking at her, and she immediately looked away again, but her cheeks were twitching involuntarily from amusement at their little game. Chen Ping'an smiled as he relented. If you want to follow me, then do as you please. I'll try and find a place for you to stay once we reach the Springdew Garden, but let me make this clear in advance. If you change your mind somewhere along the way and want to return to Mute Lake, you'll have to do so on your own. She immediately rushed to Chen Ping'an's side, then puffed out her chest as she declared, I would never change my mind. I'm a great water monster. Yep, a great water monster the size of a grain of rice, Chen Ping'an scoffed. A rare look of embarrassment appeared on her face. Such an embarrassing detail had to be left out of the novel. From there onward, Chen Ping'an was accompanied on his journey by a little girl who frequently complained of thirst. The little girl was thoroughly enjoying her time with him. One time they sat together atop a wall to watch the door gods of two different households bickering with each other. The two households were situated directly across from one another, and ironically, the household with the scholarly door god plastered to their doors was home to a gallant hero, while a talented scholar had come out of the household with the martial door god plastered to their doors. Up to that point, the little girl still only knew Chen Ping'an as Chen Haoran, and he plastered some talisman to her forehead, following which the two sat down atop the wall to watch the bickering match. There was also one time when they encountered a marriage between the daughter of a mountain god and the son of a river god. It seemed like a massively festive occasion, but in reality, the wedding took place in complete silence. At the time, Chen Ping'an had voluntarily stepped off the path to make way for the marriage procession. An old maidservant from the mountain god entourage handed him a celebratory red packet, and to the little girl's chagrin, he accepted the red packet and politely offered a bunch of congratulatory words. In her eyes, it was extremely embarrassing that he had accepted the red packet as it only contained a single measly snowflake coin. After that, they encountered one of the legendary gods of the 5 mountains on a stroll. It was a deity dressed in gold, riding atop a white horse with an extremely long tail, presenting a stunning sight to behold. In a dilapidated temple, the two of them witnessed 3 beautiful women emerge, seemingly out of thin air, to meet with a scholar from the world of the living. Unfortunately, Chen Ping'an refused to watch the scandalous events that unfolded next, and he forbade the little girl from peeking as well. Upon their return the next day, they discovered 3 clay statues of beautiful maidens standing in the church, but they were each missing a handkerchief, a golden hairpin, and a bracelet. What was even more amusing was the time when they inadvertently encountered several spirits that were posing as scholars in a secluded paradise in the wilderness. Initially, the spirits were very warm and accommodating, but one of them then asked if Chen Ping'an could make an impromptu poem on the spot, a request that left him completely stumped. The spirits instantly turned on him, denouncing him as a talentless shrew. In the end, the two of them were forced to leave with their tails tucked between their legs, but Chen Ping'an wasn't bothered, and the little girl had found the interaction very amusing. These were some of the highlights of their time together. But much more of their time was spent doing mundane tasks like traveling at night and starting fires for cooking. During their time together, the little girl had noticed that Chen Ping'an could be rather strange at times. One time, he was making his way down a walkway constructed along a cliff face. For some reason, he rushed directly into the cliff face, then pummeled his way straight through the entire mountain with his bare fists alone. He would also often walk around in circles at night, doing so the entire night in a state of pseudo-sleep. In contrast, she would always sleep soundly through the night, and it was often the case that she would still see him wandering in circles when she got up the next morning. There were also times when he would display a rather playful side to himself. On time, they were passing by a waterside pavilion. It was raining heavily, and a bunch of scholars were gathered in the pavilion, appreciating the downpour. Right as spirits were high, Chen Ping'an did something to make the rain instantly stop, leaving the scholars in the pavilion completely rooted to the spot, while the little girl hid in the water, chortling with mirth. Every once in a while, he would give his wine gourd a gentle pat, and a tiny flying sword would fly out from within, only to be used as a razor for facial grooming. One time, he turned to flash her a smile as he was shaving, but she couldn't bring herself to smile back. That was an immortal flying sword, for heaven's sake. He also helped some farmers plant some seedlings into their fields on one occasion. He removed his conical bamboo hat and his bamboo bookcase to help them in their work, and he appeared very happy doing it. Initially, the farmers were worried that he was just an inexperienced scholar that would only cause more work for them, but to their surprise, he was every bit as skilled in farm work as they were. After the job was done, the farmers invited him back to their village for a meal, but he politely refused and left. However, none of these trivial events were particularly exciting or worthy of being written into the story about her. Even after accompanying him on his journey for so long, she hadn't gained even a smidgen of fame or renown. No one knew that she was the great water monster of Mute Lake, and whenever someone asked her name, he would only tell them that her surname was Zhou and leave it at that. There was only one time when he did something that she felt like was worthy of admiration. There was a small boat traveling over a river when a huge luchuan came lurching toward it. There wasn't enough time for the boat to swerve out of the way, and right when its passengers sank into the depths of despair, Chen Ping'an appeared at the head of the boat, stopping the luchuan with a single hand while drinking out of a flagon of wine. There was also one time when they had sat together on the city walls of a lavish capital city at night, looking down at the countless lights below, which shimmered like a galaxy of stars. He finally said something worthy of a scholar, remarking that there were galaxies of stars both up above and down below, and that there was immense beauty to be found both above and beneath the heavens. For some reason, a hint of melancholy welled up in the little girl's heart, just a little bit, the size of a grain of rice. She wasn't homesick, not even in the slightest. It was just that when she gazed upon Chen Ping'an's side profile, she was reminded of the sorrow that she often felt as a water monster lurking in the depths, watching people come and go, but unable to fit in as she wasn't a human herself. Chen Ping'an seemed to have sensed her melancholy, and he gave her a gentle pat on the head as a gesture of consolation. In that instant, she felt like perhaps his name really was Chen Haoran. During their travels they passed through the Peach Branch Nation but didn't visit the Azure Stone residence. The little girl was rather displeased about this, but her mood was instantly lifted once they skirted around the Golden Crow Palace. Her mood was like a fickle cloud in the sky. On this day, they reached an immortal fairy station, where everyone felt new and intriguing to the little girl, and it was here that they could finally travel to the Spring Dew Garden by ship. The little girl had truly grown tired of traveling on foot after all this time. The little girl was standing in the bamboo bookcase, looking so intently at everything that her eyes were beginning to water. Unfortunately for her, she had made an agreement with Chen Ping'an, one that stipulated that she had to stay in the bamboo case and remain silent whenever they were in any place where there were many cultivators. There was barely anything inside the bamboo case, only a sword that she had never seen Chen Ping'an use. She kicked it a few times to see if it would react, but whenever she bent down to unsheath it, Chen Ping'an would warn her not to do that, telling her that the sword was already close to running out of patience, and that if she continued to prod it, then he wouldn't be responsible for what happened to her. This was all very frustrating to her, and she raised a hand, then hesitated for some time before smacking Chen Ping'an on the back of the head, immediately following which she leaned back in the bamboo case and pretended to be sound asleep. Initially, Chen Ping'an ignored her as he was too busy bartering with the shopkeeper over a set of rubbings of an ancient plaque. Emboldened by Chen Ping'an's inaction, the little girl rolled up her sleeves and began pummeling the back of his head over and over again. Finally, Chen Ping'an exited the shop, having purchased a total of 32 rubbings for 10 snowflake coins, and he asked, "How long are you planning to keep this up for?" The little girl's hand instantly drew to a halt mid-sweat, and she gently patted him on the shoulder as she explained, "I was just brushing off some dust. A scholar like you needs to keep up an impeccable appearance. You know, you really can be as dull as a blunt rock sometimes. After you stopped that Luchuan on the river, there were so many fair young maidens on the Luchuan that looked as if they wanted to marry you there and then. Why didn't you board the Luchuan to have some tea and wine with them? It's not like they were going to eat you. You hit me 16 times. I'm keeping count. You owe me 1 snowflake coin for each hit," Chen Ping'an said, changing the subject entirely. "That's nothing," the little girl scoffed as she crossed her arms and stood up on the tips of her toes in the bookcase. The two of them boarded the ship together, and the fact that he was carrying a little girl in a bamboo case on his back was naturally bound to attract a great deal of attention. However, most of the passers-by merely gazed upon Chen Ping'an with derision and mockery. In their eyes, true immortals were those who possessed almighty steeds capable of bounding over mountains and traversing vast seas. Yet here this man was, serving as a steed himself to a little girl. Chen Ping'an wasn't bothered by this. They were in the midst of the grain rain solar term, so it was often bright and clear during the day, but rainy at night, thereby making it the perfect time to be traveling on foot by day to appreciate the passing scenery. However, Chen Ping'an was hoping to catch the tail end of the gathering in the spring dew garden. He was the owner of a cloth wrapper shop, and he had to put it to good use. The little girl was as restless as ever as she said, "You should have boarded that Luchuan to have some tea. From the shore, I could clearly see 2 beautiful women in lavish dresses on the Luchuan. Given the grand entrance that you made, stopping the Luchuan with one hand, I'm sure you could have easily won their hearts. You're just a little girl. Yet you're constantly going on and on about romantic affairs. If you were a man, I feel like you would have eventually succumbed to perversion in Mute Lake and become a dreaded scourge far and wide. If that had happened, then I would have gladly stood by and watched as you were captured by the Azure Stone Residence or the Golden Crow Palace," Chen Ping'an chuckled. The little girl punched him in the shoulder with a displeased expression as she complained, "Nonsense. I'm a great water monster, but I've never harmed anyone. In fact, I don't even like scaring anyone." "That's 1 more snowflake coin," Chen Ping'an said. The little girl gave him a punch to the back of the head and he warned, "If you're going to hit me in the head, then it'll be 1 lesser heat coin per hit." The little girl considered her current wealth, and she realized that she didn't have much left once she subtracted the grain rain coin that Chen Ping'an had spent to save her. It was no wonder that the people passing by Mute Lake often remarked that wealth was the basis of one's courage. After some contemplation, she proposed, "Lend me a grain rain coin. Right now, I don't have much money on my hands, so I won't be able to hit you many times at all." Chen Ping'an completely ignored her, changing the subject altogether as he asked, "Do you know why I bought that jar of sauerkraut from that prefectural city earlier?" "How am I supposed to know the answer to that?" the little girl asked. "Did we finish our supply of pickled vegetables? But that can't be it, I've barely had any at all. You're so stingy that you always look at me like I've stolen something from you, whenever I try to have a little extra. I bought the sauerkraut because I heard it goes great with fish." Chen Ping'an chuckled. The little girl immediately understood what he was implying, and she was simultaneously impressed by her own smarts while also feeling hurt by the implications, silently wiping away her tears as she hugged her knees to her chest in the bamboo bookcase. However, as soon as Chen Ping'an entered his room on the bottom floor of the ship and set down his bamboo case, she immediately jumped out from within, then clasped her hands behind her back as she scoffed with a disdainful expression. "You're the stingiest person I've ever seen." Chen Ping'an removed his conical bamboo hat, There was tea on the table, and apparently, it was a specialty local product of the ferry station that couldn't be found anywhere else. Hence, he decided to pour himself a cup, and even though the tea was largely devoid of spiritual energy, it had a very sweet and refreshing taste. It was said that prior to the construction of the ferry station, there had once been a retired official that wanted to construct a summer vacation residence. While selecting the site of the residence, he stumbled upon a small pond. At the time it was enshrouded under a veil of dawn mist, and its water was particularly clear and refreshing, perfect for brewing tea and wine. Once word of the pond began to spread, more and more people came to visit, and the cultivators among them discovered that it was abundant with spiritual energy, but all of that spiritual energy was restricted to a small area on the mountain where the pond was situated. Hence, it was decided that an immortal ferry station would be constructed here. And it was actually quite far away from the sect of the ferry station's owner. Qian Ping'an began to carry out his 6-step walking meditation, while the little girl sat on a chair with a bored expression, swinging her legs back and forth as she whined, "I want to eat the turtle jelly from that shop on the corner of the ferry station street. It was really bitter and refreshing. I couldn't savor it properly last time because I was being jostled around in the bamboo case. It's all your fault. You were walking around so much, visiting so many shops, but you barely ended up even buying anything. Quick, get me a serving of turtle jelly right now." Qian Ping'an paid no heed to her. She was just rambling out of boredom anyway, so she wasn't expecting a response. She knew that she would have to be subjected to another extended period of boredom as soon as she saw Qian Ping'an commence his walking meditation. She jumped down from her chair, then dragged it all the way to the window, then got up to stand on the chair with her arms crossed. The ship had 2 floors, but Qian Ping'an was too stingy to pay for a room on the 2nd floor with the superior view. Hence, there were often people passing by on the deck, and there were also more people gathered at the railing, obstructing her views, and to further compound her frustrations, not even a single one of them knew that she was the great water monster of Mute Lake. The ship began to slowly ascend, and her mood was instantly lifted. She immediately turned to Qian Ping'an with an excited expression as she yelled, "We're flying! Look, the shops at the ferry station are all so small now. As small as grains of rice." This was her first time traveling on an immortal ship, and she wondered if the clouds in the sky were edible. This was a question that she had been mulling over for countless years while looking up at the clouds from the bottom of Mute Lake. Qian Ping'an continued to practice his walking meditation. There were quite a few people gathered at the railing, discussing recent newsworthy events, and as soon as any mention of the deity Visage Nation and the Yellow Wind Valley were made, the little girl would immediately listen intently, latching onto every word. Someone said that the yellow-robed patriarch of the Yellow Wind Valley had perished, but he wasn't slain by the master of the Golden Crow Palace. Instead, it seemed that he was severely wounded by the Golden Crow Palace master, only to then be subjugated by a passing eminent monk from the deity Visage Nation. However, for some reason, the old monk never claimed responsibility for the death of Patriarch Yellow Wind, nor did he reveal any further details on the circumstances of Patriarch Yellow Wind's demise. The little girl was clawing at her own head, dying to say something. If Qian Ping'an hadn't forbidden her from running her mouth, everyone on the entire ship would have already been made aware of the truth. She really wanted to yell out the window that she and Qian Ping'an were the ones responsible for killing Patriarch Yellow Wind. She turned around with a pitiable expression, then proposed in a quiet voice, "I can revert back to my true form, and you can slice off a few kilograms of meat from my body to cook with your sauerkraut, but in exchange let me talk to those people. I won't tell them that you killed Patriarch Yellow Wind. All I'll say is that I'm the great water monster of Mute Lake, and that I personally witnessed that battle." "What's the hurry?" Qian Ping'an asked. "Everyone will find out once the novel or travel journal about you is written and published. You can even say that you killed Patriarch Yellow Wind yourself with a single punch." The little girl knew that Qian Ping'an was right, but she was still dying to say something. Thankfully for her, Qian Ping'an wasn't completely heartless and he said, "The rooms on the 1st floor don't come with free newspapers, so go and purchase a copy for me. Having said that, if it's too expensive, then don't worry about it." The little girl readily agreed. If nothing else, this was a good opportunity for her to get out of the room and go on a little stroll. With that in mind, she jumped down from the chair, then rummaged through her belongings before pulling out a radiant little pouch. Qian Ping'an had already closed the window with a sweep of his sleeve before plastering a talisman to it. This was standard procedure that the little girl was already accustomed to, and she pulled out a handful of snowflake coins from her little pouch, then also pulled out a lesser heat coin after some thought. Throughout the entire process, the contents of her pouch were jangling incessantly. Aside from coins, the pouch also contained a bunch of small trinkets, such as those white bells that she had given to that scholar all those years ago. These were all her treasures that she had accumulated over the years. After that, she returned the pouch to the rest of her belongings, then casually left it on the table. As she walked out the room, she cautioned, "Make sure to keep an eye on my stuff so it doesn't get stolen. Otherwise, we'll both have to starve." "Oh, you must be feeling generous today if you're willing to pay for the newspaper out of your own pocket," Qian Ping'an jibed. The little girl turned to him with a displeased expression as she challenged, "Are you trying to call me stingy? If you keep this up, I'll make you split the costs of the newspaper with me." That worked like a charm, immediately getting Qian Ping'an to shut his mouth. The little girl put on a mature display far beyond her years as she sighed. "How are you going to get any of the celestial maidens to like you if you're so stingy all the time?" Qian Ping'an continued his walking meditation as he smiled and said, "As usual, no fooling around. Come back right away after you've bought the newspaper." Around 15 minutes later, the door swung open, and the little girl swaggered into the room before slamming a thick pile of newspapers down onto the table. Then, while Qian Ping'an's back was turned to her during his walking meditation, she immediately took full advantage, making a string of faces at him. Once he turned back around, she instantly ceased her shenanigans as she sat on the chair with her arms crossed. Qian Ping'an finally stopped in his tracks, then pulled out his folding fan and sat down at the table before asking, "You weren't fleeced, were you? Do I look that stupid to you?" The little girl sneered. These precious newspapers would have cost 2 lesser heat coins under normal circumstances, but I managed to barter the price all the way down to 1. I'm the great water monster of Mute Lake. When it comes to bartering, no one is a match for me. Qian Ping'an flipped through the newspapers in a slightly exasperated manner. Some of these newspapers were dated as far back as the previous year. Going by the normal market price, such a large stack of newspapers would have indeed been worth a lesser heat coin, but newspapers were like seasonal products, often completely losing their value after a short period of time. Hence, despite the large quantity of newspapers that had been obtained, they weren't actually worth even half a lesser heat coin. On the surface, it seemed that the staff on the ship couldn't be blamed. After all, this had been a fully consensual transaction from both parties. However, given the circumstances, it was clear that they had taken advantage of the little girl. In Qian Ping'an's eyes, the little girl possessed some very good traits. She was not the brightest, but there were some traits in her that were nothing short of priceless. Just like with the young armed escort that had offered him that water pouch, even though Qian Ping'an hadn't accepted the water pouch, his thirst was more than quenched by the kind gesture. The little girl had just been beaten up outside, but she seemed determined to keep that to herself. After stumbling back to Qian Ping'an's room, she hid outside for quite some time to compose herself before entering the room, choosing to swallow the bitter pill rather than turn to Qian Ping'an for help just because she could. Perhaps in her eyes this was all a part of her journey. In the future book that was to be written about her, some things had to be included, but some of the embarrassing and trivial things could be excluded. Qian Ping'an leaned back in his chair, gently fanning himself as he said, "If it hurts, then complain and whine a little. I'm not the scholar who's going to be writing your story, so you don't have to worry about embarrassing yourself in front of me." The little girl's expression instantly crumpled as tears and snot began to flow down her face, but even so, she still tried to put up a strong front, turning away to swallow the blood in her mouth. "What happened?" Qian Ping'an asked with a smile. The little girl wiped her hands haphazardly all over her face, then lowered her head in silence. "What's wrong? Are you worried that you won't get the chance to go out by yourself again now that you've caused trouble on your first ever solo outing?" Qian Ping'an asked with a smile. The reality was that she had never caused any trouble over the course of their long journey together. Instead, all she had done was gaze upon the vast world outside the Yellow Wind Valley and Mute Lake with wonder and intrigue. The little girl nodded in response in a dejected manner. Chan Ping'an closed his folding fan, then smiled as he urged, "Tell me what happened. You've made many jokes at my expense along our journey. It's time that you let me have a good laugh at your expense for once. It's important to reciprocate. Understood?" The little girl rested her cheek on the table as she gently traced a finger over the table's surface. There were no gripes or anger in her heart, just a little bit of sorrow the size of a grain of rice. "I don't want to talk about it. It's not like anything happened to me anyway. I'm a great water monster that's witnessed a ton of life and death. I've seen many people die near Mute Lake, and I didn't dare to save them. Patriarch Yellow Wind is really strong, and if I came out of my lake, not only would I not be able to save anyone, I would also be killed myself, so all I could do was gather the remains of his victims once he was done with them. Some would be carried away by their grieving friends and relatives, while others would be left in the desert. It's really all very sad. I'm not afraid of death, I'm just afraid that no one will remember me. There are so many people under the heavens, and not even a single one of them knows of me." Chan Ping'an leaned forward and gently tapped her head with his folding fan as he warned, "If you're not going to tell me now, I won't listen even if you change your mind later." The little girl immediately sat up straight and began swaying her head from side to side with a joyful smile on her face as she said in a sing-song voice, "I'm not telling. I'm not telling." Chan Ping'an watched her with his head cocked to the side, and he pressed his folding against her forehead with a smile as he said, "There are many people out there who were never educated by their parents, teachers, or masters. When it comes to those people, they need to learn how to conduct themselves the hard way." The little girl's brows furrowed tightly in contemplation and befuddlement. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she also didn't want him to see that she had no idea what he was talking about, so she was trying to pretend like she did have some idea of what he was talking about. However, that was proving rather difficult. It was just like how Chan Ping'an had been put on the spot by those spirits posing as scholars that had requested him to recite an impromptu poem. He had been completely stumped at the time, just as she was completely stumped now. Chan Ping'an rose to his feet, and as soon as he did so, the talisman on the window flew off on its own, following which the window itself was also flung open. At this point, the ship was already high up above the clouds, and he stood at the window with his sleeves billowing in the wind, while the little girl looked on with a pout of envy and displeasure. "Why does he get to be so tall?" She hesitated momentarily, then seemed to have suddenly arrived at an epiphany as she got up to stand on her chair. Wouldn't it make her story more fleshed out and well-rounded if there were some struggles included? With that in mind, a wide smile instantly appeared on her face, and she clasped her hands behind her back as she began pacing back and forth over the tiny surface of the chair as she said, "After I bought those newspapers, the man who sold them to me immediately burst into laughter with his friends. I didn't know what they were laughing about, so I smiled at them. You told me to be polite to others, regardless of whether they're humans or demons. One of his friends just so happened to leave his room, and as he accidentally bumped into me as he opened his door. I stumbled as a result, and the newspaper spilled out of my hands and onto the ground. I told him that it's fine, and I bent down to pick up the newspapers, but he stepped on me and even ground his foot into my back. I don't think that was an accident. I couldn't help but grimace because it hurt, and he sent me flying with a kick. The man who sold me the newspapers told him to let me go, seeing as I was a passenger on the ship, so the other man did, and I picked up the newspapers and ran back here. I'm not lying to you. I grimaced just a little bit because it really hurt, but only a little." She raised 2 fingers as she insisted, "Only this much?" Chan Ping'an turned to her with a smile as he asked, "Do you think it's right to be kind and polite to all people at all times in all settings, or should it depend on the circumstances? Would it be more appropriate to be polite to kind people and ruthless to bad people? However, if the punishment that we administer upon an evildoer does not match the extent of their transgressions, wouldn't that go against the theory of sequential order? In clashes between good and evil, the outcome is often that the good side is brought down to their counterpart's level. Over time, the seed of evil will flourish more and more, while the forces of good are diminished further and further. How can we resolve this problem?" The little girl's face immediately crumpled in a look of focus and contemplation, and she was doing her best to tell herself that she understood exactly what he had just said, but she simply didn't want to respond. Chan Ping'an smiled as he tapped his folding fan against his own heart and said, "There's no need for you to think too much about it. I'm just talking to myself. The little girl was feeling a little guilty for making Qian Ping'an think so much. Compared with the mysterious and unfathomable Qian Ping'an, she much preferred the simple and jovial Qian Ping'an that helped the farmers in the fields and pummeled his way through a mountain with his bare fists. Thankfully, a smile quickly appeared on Qian Ping'an's face, and he leaped out the window to arrive on the deck of the ship outside. Let's go look at the scenery. There are a lot of beautiful things in this world, not just oppressive bullies. He leaned against the window frame as he extended a hand and jibed. Should I lift you out by the back of your collar? I can come out on my own. The little girl snapped in an indignant manner, then jumped out through the window, but she was still clearly feeling a little fearful. She grabbed onto Qian Ping'an's sleeve in an uneasy manner, and all of a sudden, she felt like standing in the bamboo bookcase wasn't so bad. She turned to take a glance at the open window, then said, I know we're both poor, but it's not like we don't have any belongings. If our stuff gets stolen, we'll be in an even worse situation. I don't want to eat sauerkraut fish, and you better not think about it either. They can try and steal our stuff, but they may not live to tell the tale, Qian Ping'an said in an indifferent manner. That was a really badass quote, the little girl praised as her eyes lit up. However, she immediately received a knock to the head from Qian Ping'an's folding fan. Don't learn to speak like that from me. The little girl threw her hands onto her head and stepped on Qian Ping'an's foot with an indignant expression. She didn't dare to walk on the railing, but Qian Ping'an insisted, picking her up and placing her on the railing himself. Initially, she felt very timid and fearful, but her eyes soon began to glow with excitement at the sight of all of the people watching her. She looked down to see Qian Ping'an walking lazily along the deck below her. He was holding his folding fan in one hand while raising his other hand up high to hold onto hers. She told him that he didn't need to hold her hand, and that she could walk along the railing unassisted just fine. Before long, the strange duo had drawn the attention of many of the cultivators and martial artists on the ship. They watched as the little girl in black swung her arms back and forth, walking along the railing with her chest puffed out in a proud display. Meanwhile, the scholar in white slowly walked along on the deck below her with a smile on his face. Hey, can I ask you something? One time I woke up in the middle of the night to find that you weren't with me. Where did you go? The little girl asked. Qian Ping'an smiled as he replied, I took a little stroll. I pretended to almost be beaten to death by someone. Then, don't worry about it. Just treat it like you're reading a boring story. The story is so boring that you feel like you're about to be put to sleep halfway through reading it, so you put it away. You know, it's really frustrating being left on a cliffhanger like this, the little girl complained. We're travel companions, are we not? You'll have to bear with me, Qian Ping'an said with a smile. The little girl crossed her arms as she continued walking along the railing and yelled, In that case, I want to eat turtle jelly. One bowl isn't going to be enough, I want 2 large bowls. I paid for the newspapers, so you have to pay for the 2 bowls of turtle jelly. Sure, but we'll have to see if the next ferry station sells turtle jelly, Qian Ping'an replied with a nod. If there's no turtle jelly, then I'll change to something else, the little girl said, and she felt like she was extremely smart, having accounted for all possible scenarios. I'm not getting it for you if it's too expensive, Qian Ping'an said in a hesitant manner. The little girl swung a displeased kick in his direction, only for him to casually dodge by cocking his head to the side, then swiped her foot away with his folding fan as he urged, Focus on walking. Among the onlookers were the administrator and some of the workers on the ship. There was also a man standing on the second-floor observation deck with some friends. He and 7 or 8 other people were gathered around a young man and woman, who resembled a pair of moons nestled in a bed of stars. He was staying in the room next to the heaven-grade room on the ship, and it was supposed to be very expensive, but he didn't have to spend a single snowflake coin on accommodation, one of the benefits of having powerful connections. The young woman at the center of the group wasn't particularly stunning in appearance, but she was dressed in a precious Dao robe and she smiled as she asked, Has this little fish monster reached the abode tier yet? The young man beside her nodded as he replied, If I'm not mistaken, she appears to be precisely at the abode tier. She's not yet able to fly, so if she were to fall off the ship, then she'll surely fall to her death unless there just so happens to be a body of water down below. There was a brawny man next to the young couple and he chuckled, I don't know where this little water monster came from, young Master Wei, but she's definitely not the brightest. She went to purchase some newspapers from Administrator Liu earlier, and she spent an entire lesser heat coin on them. Oh? So she's quite a rich little water monster then. The handsome young man referred to as young Master Wei exclaimed with a look of mock surprise. The young woman was very amused, and her eyes were filled with deep affection as she gazed upon the young man beside her. Everyone else also burst into laughter, as if they had just heard an exquisite joke. That scholar appears to be the owner of that dirty little thing. Why is it that he seems more like an uncouth martial artist than a chi refiner? The young woman asked. Make sure you don't say something like that in front of my father, young Master Wei said with a smile. Right now, he's the #1 martial artist of our great Guan Empire, so he's going to feel very awkward if he hears you badmouthing martial artists. My apologies, I misspoke, the young woman hurriedly said with an apologetic smile. Why are you being so formal with me, Qing? You make me feel like a stranger sometimes, young Master Wei said in an exasperated manner. A bright smile instantly appeared on the young woman's face. She was from the Nightglow Grass Hall of the Spring Dew Garden, and her father was one of the Spring Dew Garden's guest elders. He was a very shrewd businessman and was responsible for managing half of the entire Spring Dew Garden mountain range on his own. He was a golden courtier earth immortal, and wherever he went, he was always treated as an esteemed guest. On this occasion, he had sent his daughter to invite this young Master Wei to the spring farewell banquet, which was set to take place at the end of the gathering in the Spring Dew Garden. On the southeastern coast was the Great Guan Empire, which had as many as 3 subsidiary strategic barrier nations. The young man came from the Iron Worship Residence, one of the 3 most powerful clans of the empire. The clan had given rise to countless officials over the course of generations, but as a young man, the current clan leader, Wei Ying, decided to resign from his official post to join the military. He had carved out a completely new path for himself, and currently wielded immense power in the military, serving as the empire's foremost border general. His eldest son was an assistant minister of one of the empire's 6 ministries, and this young man was his youngest son, Wei Bai. He had been pampered from a young age, and he was also a young cultivation prodigy that was extremely renowned across the entire empire. There was even a story about Wei Bai that began with a rare excursion from one of the Spring Dew Garden's nascent tier patriarchs. While passing by the Wei clan's Iron Worship residence, he spotted Wei Ying and Wei Bai greeting him at the entrance, and he remarked that at the moment Wei Bai was still being referred to as Wei Ying's son, yet to emerge from his father's shadow, but in no more than 30 years the roles would be reversed and Wei Ying would be known as Wei Bai's father. Wei Ying had been ecstatic to hear this. The nascent tier patriarch of the Spring Dew Garden was renowned for being stingy when it came to praising others, so this was a lofty compliment indeed. The nascent tier patriarch's praise of Wei Bai's cultivation aptitude instantly made him the object of envy and admiration from countless people in the imperial court. Even the emperor himself bestowed an imperial edict and a prized treasure upon the Iron Worship residence, encouraging Wei Bai to continue to work hard in his cultivation and become a pillar of the empire as soon as possible. On paper, Wei Bai and the young woman were not a good fit. Back when they first met, Wei Ying had immediately tried to bring them together, even remarking directly to her face that they were a match made in heaven. However, at the time, the patriarch of the Spring Dew Garden still hadn't visited the Great Guan Empire, so her father was very much in disapproval. Wei Bai still hadn't reached the abode tier yet, so his future potential was very much unclear. After all, the abode tier had always been known as the first major hurdle for chi refiners. However, after that, Wei Bai continued to progress rapidly in his cultivation, and after receiving such unadulterated praise from the patriarch of the Spring Dew Garden, the status of the Iron Worship residence was greatly elevated. All of a sudden, the young woman's father became the one desperate to bring them together, while the Iron Worship residence began to display reluctance. This was why she had been sent to invite Wei Bai to the spring farewell banquet. Even if it weren't for the instructions of her father, she would have been more than happy to make this trip. There were no servants or guards accompanying her. The Spring Dew Garden wasn't exactly a dominant power in the area, but it had an extensive network of connections and friends, so her safety was all but assured. For example, the patriarch of the Golden Crow Palace would travel alone once every few years to the Spring Dew Garden to collect water for his tea. However, Wei Bai was accompanied by a pair of guards, one of whom was a guest elder of the Iron Worship residence. It was said that she had once been a demonic cultivator, and had already been seeking refuge in the Iron Worship residence for several decades. As for the other guard, he was a Vajrabhati tier martial artist, someone that could influence the martial fortune of an entire small nation. Wei Bai turned to a well-built old man behind him, then asked, "Can you see the depths of this cultivation base, Master Liao?" The old man was resting with his eyes closed, and he opened his eyes as he smiled and said, "Judging from the sound of his breathing and footsteps, he should be the equivalent of a 5th-tier martial artist here on the border of our great Guan Empire. He's a little stronger than the average 5th-tier slouch." There was a cruel-looking old woman standing beside the old man, and she chimed in a hoarse voice, "That's an accurate evaluation, kid." The old man gave a cold harumph. Given the huge age gap between the two, it wasn't inappropriate for the old woman to refer to him as kid. However, he was a Vajrabhati tier martial artist that was renowned far and wide, but the old woman never showed him any respect, instead looking down on him as chi refiners often did. The brawny man from a major sect in the Great Guan Empire, and he rubbed his hands together eagerly as he proposed, "Should I go down there and see what that pretentious scholar's all about, young Master Wei? It'll be a fun way to pass the time and provide some entertainment for everyone, and if I may be so fortunate, perhaps Mr. Liao can also provide me with some instruction in my fist techniques." The sect that he belonged to was the leading sect in the southern region of the Great Guan Empire, with close to 10,000 members. It had many lucrative revenue sources, such as engagements in the grain and salt transport trade, and that was all thanks to the Iron Worship residence. Without the Iron Worship residence's support, there was no way it would be able to hold on to its wealth. There was a Vajrabhati tier martial arts master in the sect, but by his own admission, he had a losing head-to-head record against the old man with the Liao surname. In the northern region of the continent was a sect in which everyone used swords. The entire sect only had fewer than 200 members, including the sect leader, yet it had unmatched authority over the cultivation world in the north. The old sect leader was a man who liked to travel the world alone, and it was said that he had already reached the far-roaming tier, but no one had witnessed him in battle for close to 20 years. However, the people of the cultivation world in the south proclaimed that he was being so enigmatic and elusive, because he was trying to avoid any earth immortals and powerful swordsmen that may try to challenge him. Wei Bai shook his head with a smile as he replied, "Leave him be. Unlike the soldiers of our Iron Worship residence, you martial artists are all very proud people, and that young man is no exception. He must feel as if he's been granted a fated opportunity that's allowed him to become the owner of that little water monster, and he's eagerly showing off to everyone. There's no need for us to teach him a lesson. If he continues to blatantly show off like this even after reaching the Spring Dew Garden, then eventually, someone will teach him to be more humble. You are truly as kind and gracious as a bodhisattva, young Master Wei," the brawny man praised. "Hardly," Wei Bai chuckled with a shake of his head. "By the way, what's become of that enigmatic sect leader Feng? He's progressed to the far-roaming tier, which seems like a boon but is instead a curse," the old woman scoffed. "He's having to constantly run and hide, and that's why he appears so enigmatic. If he were just an ordinary Vajrabhati tier martial artist like this Liao brat here, there wouldn't be any trouble for him. He would just be a little ant that us cultivators could easily crush to death underfoot, but we wouldn't want to for fear of dirtying our shoes. However, now that he's reached the far-roaming tier, he's become a bigger ant, one that's worth crushing, so he's being targeted from all directions. Let's see you say that to old man Peng's face," the old man with the Liao surname sneered. "Not only would I say it to his face, I would press my finger directly into his forehead as I say it," the old woman sneered. The old man couldn't be bothered to bicker with her, so he closed his eyes and continued to rest. The brawny man wasn't feeling awkward in the slightest. It wasn't like they were talking about him anyway, and so what if they were? It would be an honor to be spoken of by an old guest elder of the Iron Worship residence, and that would be a story that he could brag about once he returned to his sect. Wei Zhen reached out to rest a hand on the railing as he sighed. "I heard that sect leader He from the north recently made a journey down south. She is truly an incredible woman. She was able to reach the upper 5 tiers at such a young age, and it seems like the heavens are determined to bestow upon her one blessing after another." Even though she's come from the tiny eastern treasured Vile continent, she was able to find a small world on our northern complete reed continent before taming many great demons and spirits. In such a short time, she's been able to establish an almighty sect and establish a firm foothold on our continent. I've heard that she was even able to ward off 2 unpolished jade-tier cultivators using her mountain protection formation and her small world. These are feats that I wouldn't even dare to dream of. If I ever travel to the north, I have to go and see her. Even if I can only catch a glimpse of her from afar, that will be a lifelong wish fulfilled. A hint of dejection welled up in the young woman's heart upon hearing this, but it quickly vanished. Both she and Wei Bai were aware that Xiaoyang was far out of his reach, and that the most he could ever hope for would be to see her from afar. Wei Bai leaned in close to the young woman, then whispered into her ear, "The moon is good to look at from time to time, but it's far off in the heavens and completely unattainable. I know better than to take the person by my side for granted, and go chasing after some unreachable pipe dream." A wide smile instantly appeared on the young woman's face. Meanwhile, the dirty little thing on the first floor of the ship was still racing joyfully back and forth along the railing. As for the young scholar, he continued to accompany her in a lazy manner, fanning himself as if he didn't have a care in the world. All of a sudden, a faint smile appeared on Wei Bai's face. Someone on the second floor had finally decided to lash out at the pair of eyesores. A burst of spiritual energy was sent flying through the air like an arrow, hurtling directly toward the little girl's leg. It was meant to shatter her kneecap, sending her flying off the ship. From an outside perspective, it would simply appear as if she had slipped and fallen, and she would only have herself to blame. The ship wouldn't be held culpable as she was the one who had chosen to walk along the railing, so she could only blame herself for falling to her demise. However, the spiritual energy arrow was kept at bay by Qian Ping'an using his fan, but it seemed that it was not without some strain. He stumbled back with his fan held aloft, pushed back by the force of the arrow, and only after crashing into the railing behind him did he finally manage to steady himself. Wei Bai shook his head in a disappointed manner. So he really is useless after all. It's a good thing I turned down Ding Tong's offer to test him. Otherwise, if word were to spread that our Iron Worship residence was picking on some mediocre 5th-tier martial artist, that would be an embarrassment for all of us. An enraged look on Qian Ping'an's face as he yelled, "Are all of the workers on this ship blind? We've just been attacked by someone from the second floor." The little girl hurriedly stopped in her tracks, then hopped down from the railing, hiding behind him in a fearful manner as she asked through her mind's lake, "Are we dealing with someone even more powerful than Patriarch Yellow Wind?" "Yes, someone much more powerful," Qian Ping'an replied in a grim voice. "Then we have to run," the little girl exclaimed in an urgent voice. Qian Ping'an closed his folding fan, then gently placed a hand onto the top of her head as he smiled and said, "But if we run away now, those people will be free to pick on others in the future. The world is like a pot of kanji. If we spot some flies in the kanji, we should scoop them up and toss them out, rather than leave them inside. Remember those people that we encountered earlier? Do you still remember what I said after the encounter?" The little girl nodded as she replied, "You said that when a calamity truly arrives, it seems like everyone is weak, but prior to that, it seems like everyone is strong because there always exists even weaker weaklings." Qian Ping'an was referring to an earlier escapade of theirs. They were traveling through a certain area when they heard from the locals that some strange things had been happening on a nearby mountain of late, so they decided to scale the mountain and take a look. On the way up, they encountered a group of traveling heroes on horseback, loudly declaring that they were going to slay the monster to make a name for themselves. For some reason, Qian Ping'an didn't move out of the way, and he was sent flying by a galloping horse. All of the riders erupted into laughter, then galloped away on horseback without so much as a single backward glance. At the time, the little girl wasn't concerned for his safety. This was a sword immortal that had slain Patriarch Yellow Wind, and he hadn't even bothered to release flying swords in his wine gourd during the battle. However, she felt very angry on his behalf, but before she had a chance to yell after the group of horseback ruffians, Qian Ping'an gently placed a hand onto her head with a smile and told her that it was fine. After that, they spotted the group of martial artists, who had been confronted by a monstrous being that stood at over 20 feet tall. At the time, it had been holding the mangled corpse of a man and chewing on one of the man's arms like a snack. Its victim was none other than the rider of the horse that had sent Qian Ping'an flying earlier. Qian Ping'an pointed his closed folding fan at the man-eating monster, then smiled as he said, "I'll allow you to enjoy this final meal before I put an end to your life." The man-eating monster immediately tossed away the corpse in its hand to turn and flee, while the warriors that had sneered upon Qian Ping'an just a moment ago began kneeling and kowtowing to him, desperately imploring him to save them. The entire sequence of events had left a very sour taste in the little girl's mouth. The people on the ship's second-floor observation deck quickly lost interest after witnessing Qian Ping'an ward off the sneak attack, deciding that the duo had been taught their lesson. As for Qian Ping'an, he didn't seem to have the guts to go after the perpetrator, merely swallowing the bitter pill and pretending as if nothing had happened. A group of people on the observation deck erupted into laughter, making no secret of the fact that they were the ones responsible for the sneak attack. A worker on the ship strode over to Qian Ping'an with an annoyed expression. He wasn't concerned for Qian Ping'an's safety. Instead, he was worried that Qian Ping'an would kick up a fuss and bother the esteemed passengers on the second floor. If that were to happen, then he surely wouldn't receive any tips from those wealthy passengers. "The hell are you yelling about? Who attacked you? Are you stupid or delusional?" The worker sneered with a cold expression. Qian Ping'an turned to the little girl and asked, "Was he the one who sold you the newspapers?" The little girl shook her head. It was an older individual that had sold her the newspapers. Qian Ping'an tapped his folding fan against his own heart as he murmured to himself, "Cultivators need to prioritize cultivation of the heart over cultivating power. Otherwise, you won't be able to go very far at all." The little girl tugged on her sleeve, then cupped a hand over her own lips as she raised her head and said in a quiet voice, "Don't get mad. If you get mad, then I'll get mad at you, and you don't want that." "I won't get mad, I'll just do a bit of preaching. I didn't preach enough last time at Verdant Bamboo Lake," Qian Ping'an said as he looked up at the second floor. "Shut your mouth and go back to your room. You're an eyesore for everyone," the ship worker snapped as he reached out to push Qian Ping'an, only for a stunned look to suddenly appear on his face. His hand had drawn to a shuddering halt an inch away from Qian Ping'an's chest, unable to advance any further. Qian Ping'an didn't even bother to look at him as he said, "Did you really say I was just a fourth-tier martial artist?" The young worker's attitude immediately took a drastic turn as he put on a fawning smile and cupped his fist in a salute as he said, "Please pardon my intrusion, esteemed passenger. I'll leave you to appreciate the scenery." He then immediately turned to flee, and Qian Ping'an allowed him to scurry away. While fleeing for his life, the worker snuck a glance back at Qian Ping'an, only to discover that he was nowhere to be seen, leaving the little girl in black all on her own. On the observation deck not far away from Wei Bai and his entourage, a group of 7 or 8 cultivators who were traveling together collectively rushed back in retreat. In the blink of an eye, Qian Ping'an had appeared before them, standing on the railing as he looked down at them with one hand clasped behind his back. One of the cultivators tried to speak, but his spiritual energy circulation abruptly became completely stagnant, and he felt as if there were a mountain weighing down upon him, robbing him of the ability to speak. "When I'm talking, all of you should learn to keep your mouth shut and listen," Qian Ping'an said with a smile, then snapped his folding fan shut before flicking it upward slightly. The chi refiner that had unleashed the sneak attack earlier was hoisted up into the air, following which Qian Ping'an grabbed him by the head and casually tossed him off the ship. With another flick of his folding fan, another cultivator in the group was lifted up into the air before being slapped off the ship with a sweep of his sleeve. In the blink of an eye, the entire group of cultivators had been thrown off the ship like a platter of dumplings into a pot of boiling water. Qian Ping'an then leaned back and plummeted off the ship after them, vanishing into the clouds below in the blink of an eye. Moments later, he returned to the ship, then silently looked up at the observation deck of the heaven-grade room with a smile on his face. "Master Liao, I believe a re-evaluation is necessary," Wei Bai said in a grim manner. The old man with the Liao surname had already risen to his feet and arrived by Wei Bai's side, and he was looking just as grim as he said, "I'm afraid I'm no longer able to gauge his cultivation base." Wei Bai took a glance at the brawny man who had offered to challenge Qian Ping'an earlier. The latter was looking deathly pale. Wei Bai turned his gaze back to the old man, then remarked with a wry smile, "It appears we're in a bit of trouble." The old woman was also standing beside Wei Bai, and she scoffed, What's the trouble? Just get little Liao to play around with him a little, and we'll know exactly what he's made of. Wei Bai didn't rush to make any decisions. The guest elders of his clan were still people, and in his eyes, a 7th-tier martial artist like Master Liao was very much worthy of his respect. Hence he said, "It's fine, Master Liao. There's no need to force yourself." The old man clenched his fists and all of the joints in his body cracked and popped as he sneered. The old softy in the south can barely put up a fight, while old man Peng's swordsman is under the protection of that prime minister, so I've been dying for an opponent. Regardless of whether he's a cultivator or a martial artist, I'm not going to pass up this opportunity. As opposed to releasing his aura in full force and going directly after Chen Ping'an, the old man gently drifted down onto the first-floor deck of the ship, then grinned. "Care to have a spar with me, kid? Rest assured, there's no bad blood between us, so I won't kill you." Chen Ping'an tucked the tip of his folding fan under his chin, as if he were contemplating the proposal, then also drifted down onto the deck as he said, "Seeing as you've made such a kind offer, it would be rude of me to fight you on even terms, so I'll let you have 3 punches at me to start." He clasped a hand behind his back, then pointed at his own forehead with his folding fan as he continued, "You can have 3 punches at me first and we'll spar on equal terms after that. If I die, then the fault lies solely with me. What do you say?" The two of them were standing around 20 meters apart from one another, and all of the passengers on the ship were chatting among themselves in hushed tones. Wei Bai was astonished by Chen Ping'an's bold offer. There was one particular passenger on the first floor who was traveling from somewhere south of the deity-visaged nation to seek refuge in the Spring Dew Garden, and his complexion was deathly pale, while his lips were quivering uncontrollably. Somehow, he had once again encountered this unpredictable and almighty young sword immortal. "I came all the way to get away from you, esteemed young sword immortal. Please spare me. It was never my intention to travel on the same ship as you. Are you sure you want to do that, kid?" The old man scoffed. "Will 3 punches not be enough?" Chen Ping'an asked with a surprised expression. "How about 4 then? If you're still not confident in your own chances, you can have 5 punches but no more than that. Otherwise, all of the spectators are going to get bored. 3 punches will suffice. I'll try to leave your body intact." The old man chuckled, following which he immediately adopted his fist stance, and ferocious fist intent came surging out of his body. Everyone on the ship felt as if there were a stiff gale blowing directly into their faces, and some of the lesser chi refiners and martial artists among them were barely even able to keep their eyes open. All of a sudden, a resounding boom rang out, and in the blink of an eye, the old man was standing where Chen Ping'an had been standing just a moment ago. As for Chen Ping'an himself, he was standing at the head of the ship with his white robe flapping and billowing around him. Many of the passengers on the ship were already prepared to cheer for Chen Ping'an's demise, but they were forced to stifle their cheers. Chen Ping'an appeared as casual and relaxed as ever, but his Adam's apple was moving ever so slightly, indicating that he was swallowing down some blood. Despite this, a faint smile remained on his face as he said, "That punch only packed enough power to kill a 6th-tier martial artist at most. I must thank you for holding back, senior." The old man's gaze fell upon Chen Ping'an's white robe, and he discovered that even though it was billowing incessantly, it remained completely unscathed. "So you're wearing a powerful Dao robe. No wonder you had the confidence to allow me 3 punches. How conniving of you." Chen Ping'an slowly strode forward as he said, "I had to sell off all of my belongings to scrounge together enough money to buy this Dao robe. Yet you're calling me conniving? That hurts my feelings a little. Fine, I won't use the power of Dao robe to withstand your punches anymore. You still have 2 more. The old man stomped a foot down onto the ground, and the entire ship dropped down over 10 feet in altitude. Using the force of the stomp, the old man launched himself forward like a bolt of lightning, and his fist intent swelled to an unprecedented peak. In the face of such an almighty blow, surely there was no way Chen Ping'an would be able to survive. However, things did not turn out the way everyone anticipated. Not only did Chen Ping'an not perish, he wasn't even moved a single inch. He was still holding his folding fan in one hand, and the only difference was that he had raised the hand that was originally clasped behind his back. This time it was the old man's turn to be sent sliding back, and Wei Bai's expression instantly darkened upon seeing this. Chen Ping'an remained still for a moment, then suddenly yelped as he pretended to sway unsteadily, and he exclaimed, "Your fist techniques are truly incredible, senior. Thank heavens you only have one punch left. I'm extremely thankful now that you didn't agree to my offer having 5 punches at me. Otherwise, I would surely be dead by the end." All of the passengers on the ship were looking on in silent exasperation. They had never seen such a half-hearted piece of acting for as long as they had been alive. The old man smiled as he declared, "Here comes the final punch." He took a deep breath, and his robe began to ripple from his fierce fist intent. He launched himself at Qian Ping'an once again, but along the way, he suddenly veered off to the side, targeting the little girl in black instead. She was having a very hard time containing her amusement at Qian Ping'an's terrible acting, and she was silently clapping her hands together to cheer her on, making sure to stop just short of her palms coming into contact with each other to avoid making any sound. In this instant it was as if the flow of time had fallen completely still. Qian Ping'an had suddenly appeared beside the little girl, and the fingers of his left hand were digging deep into the old man's throat, making it impossible for him to advance even another inch forward. Blood began gushing out of the 5 holes that had been pierced into his throat by Qian Ping'an's fingers, and this entire time, he was still holding his folding fan with one hand. He gently extricated his fingers from the old man's throat, then gave him a gentle shove on the forehead, and he was sent crashing through the railing of the ship with an almighty commotion before plummeting out of the ship altogether. Qian Ping'an turned his gaze to the second floor, then gently wiped his blood-stained left hand against the railing as he smiled and asked, "What now?" Both Wei Bai and the old woman remained silent. Moments later, everyone heard a thunderous commotion ring out in the distance. A streak of golden sword light raced onto the scene at an incredible speed, catching up to the ship in the blink of an eye, and standing atop the flying sword was a young man with a golden hairpin in his hair. He cast his gaze toward the railing then asked, "Are you the one who sliced through the lightning cloud of my Golden Crow Palace?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Qian Ping'an said with a dumbfounded expression. "I'll invite you to have some tea with me once you reach the Spring Dew Garden," the young sword immortal said with a resigned smile, then sped away just as quickly as he had come. This was a riveting story that was very much worthy of going into the future book about her. But for some reason, the little girl couldn't bring herself to be happy. She made her way to Qian Ping'an's side with her head lowered, then gently tugged on his sleeve as she said, "I'm sorry." Qian Ping'an crouched down and pinched her cheeks before gently pulling them apart, then made a funny face at her as he said with a gentle smile, "You have nothing to apologize for." A bashful smile appeared on the little girl's face, and Qian Ping'an suddenly tore off his golden sweet wine robe before draping it over her, instantly transforming her into a little girl in white. As it turned out, Qian Ping'an had been wearing another white Dao robe beneath golden sweet wine. He slowly rose to his feet as he said in a quiet voice, "No matter what happens next, make sure you don't move, not even a single inch. If you die today, I will make sure the entire northern complete reed continent knows that you were the great water monster of Mute Lake. Your surname was Zhou, and as for your full name, let's call you Zhou Meili. One, however, do not fear. I will do my best to protect you." Qian Ping'an then turned and swept his gaze over the first and second floors of the ship as he said in a casual manner, "Gao Cheng, I know you're on this ship. Have you still not been able to think of a surefire plan to kill me even after all this time? Have you become too weak after leaving your lair? Or am I too strong? If you don't make a move now, I think your chances of successfully killing me will dwindle even further once I reach the Spring Dew Garden." No one on the ship had any idea what he was talking about. A small handful of the passengers felt like the name Gao Cheng was a little familiar, but they couldn't recall exactly who this Gao Cheng was. The ship continued onward over the sea of clouds, basked in a golden veil of sunlight. Qian Ping'an patted the sword-nurturing gourd strapped to his waist, then condensed his voice into a line as he scoffed, "Are you afraid I have some tricks up my sleeve? Surely the Lord of Skeleton Wall City, and the ruler of all ghostly beings on the Skeleton Shoal isn't such a coward. I'm sure you already know what happened in Imperial Accompanying City. I really did almost die back there. I was worried that you would get bored, so I even reduced my initial offer of 5 punches down to 3 just for you. I'm a much more hospitable host than you, am I not? Flying Sword First is right here in my possession, as is the Great Tao Foundation of you and the entire Skeleton Shoal. If you miss this opportunity, it won't come again." Chen Ping'an was certain that Gao Cheng was on the ship, and he was confident that Gao Cheng had heard him. Do you think I have no way of forcing you to reveal yourself? Chen Ping'an asked with a smile. The eyes of a ship worker who was hiding around the corner instantly turned as black as ink, and the same applied to a Silver Screen Nation cultivator who had survived the ordeal in the verdant bamboo lake Dragon Palace and was fleeing to the Spring Dew Garden for refuge. Both of their 3 immortal souls and 7 mortal forms instantly crumbled, leaving them as nothing more than a pair of lifeless husks. They remained completely oblivious even up to the very moment that they died, and they never realized that a seed had already been planted deep within each of their souls long ago. The 2 dead men slowly emerged with smiles on their faces, and they were communicating with one another through their minds' lakes. One of them smiled as he said, "Who else could it be but Zhu Quan? Could it be another patriarch of the Flax Robe sect, or have all 3 of them come? I think there's a very good chance that all 3 of them are here. You really are a lot like me from back in the day. Seeing you now, I can't help but miss the days when I had to fight tooth and nail just to survive. Those were very difficult times but also very fulfilling. It was the most alive I had ever felt," the other man said. However, Chen Ping'an's gaze wasn't on the 2 dead men. Instead, his gaze continued to roam over the ship as he condensed his voice into a line and said, "I heard that for cultivators who've truly reached the mountain summit, they're capable of more than just releasing their yin soul out of their body and creating yang soul avatars. You've concealed yourself very well, so I'm sure you're not worried about the Flax Robe sect weeding you out. Are you banking on the hope that the Flax Robe sect and I won't kill all of the passengers on this ship? Thanks to you and He Xiaoyang, I've already become very much like the 2 of you in the way I do things. Also, your true trump card has to be a formidable golden core tier cultivator or a far-roaming tier martial artist that snuck their way onto the ship, neither of which would be difficult to find. From the moment that I predicted that you would leave the Skeleton Shoal and board this ship, you have already lost." After a brief silence, one of the 2 dead men asked, "So that was purely a gamble?" "A gamble?" Chen Ping'an sneered. "Other people only begin gambling once they're at the gambling table, yet I've been gambling my entire life ever since I can remember. Setting aside luck, I haven't met anyone my age with superior gambling skills to mine. Not Chao Xiai, not Ma Kushuan, and certainly not Yang Ningxing." He rolled up his right sleeve with his left hand as he took a step forward, then rolled up his left sleeve with his right hand and took another step forward, moving in a very slow and meticulous fashion. He raised his head to face the oncoming breeze, and with both sleeves rolled up, there was no more wind blowing inside them. "I've considered that Du of the Ghost Axe Palace could be you, that the assassin who hid in the cart of feces to eat shit could be you, that the vagrant cultivator who offered me that lesser heat coin in that small alley could be you, that the young armed escort who offered me the water pouch could be you, that the old monk that faced off against Patriarch Yellow Wind could be you, and I've even considered the possibility that the little girl accompanying me on my journey could be you. There's no helping it. You're Gao Cheng, so I have no choice but to be extra careful. Hence, this has been a very arduous journey for me, but it was very much worth it. I've never been able to make such rapid progress when it comes to cultivation of the heart. I suggest you make yourself appear as formidable as possible today. Otherwise, I'll immediately turn around and travel to the Skeleton Shoal to return the favor. Trust me when I say that that would be a nasty surprise for both you and the Skeleton Shoal." The ship worker nodded with a smile as he said, "I believe you. I've never made any empty threats like these myself, whether it be in life or death." An enlightened look appeared in the eyes of the man standing by the window, following which a genuine smile surfaced on his face as he said, "I see. I neglected to consider the person that wants you dead the most, so I deserve to have failed here. The foundation of her great Tao must have been somewhat harmed during the battle in Imperial Accompanying City. If I were He Xiaoyang, I would completely sever all karmic ties with you so that I'm never implicated by you again. However, seeing as she's He Xiaoyang, perhaps she's only hiding in that sect's small world for now in order to temporarily avoid her karmic entanglements with you. Having said that, none of that is important. What's important is that because of you two, I've made a mistake on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, but one that has resulted in the same outcome. I made a move on you even when she was present, so in her absence, I would definitely come after you again. That's a very interesting way of thinking." Chen Ping'an raised a thumb to wipe the corner of his lips, then said, I'm not familiar with He Xiaoyang. You can denounce me as a dog, but don't bring her into this. So what's next? You expect me to believe that you've only sent 2 golden courtier ghostly beings after me? Are you trying to insult me, or insult yourself? An old man carrying a sword on his back slowly emerged from the rear end of the ship, and it seemed that he had also been staying in a room on the first floor of the ship. However, for some reason, his footsteps were rather unsteady, and there was a twisted look on his face, as if he were in the midst of an intense struggle. Moments later, he gently exhaled, then also condensed his voice into a line as he remarked, "Every self that isn't properly restrained will become someone else. Let this be a lesson to you as well." After the old man appeared, the area around the ship was isolated into a small world by some people outside, but the old man wasn't fazed by this at all. "You're trying to educate me? You think you're worthy?" Chun Ping'an sneered. The old man fixed his gaze on Chun Ping'an as he smiled and asked, "Are you sure this is what you want?" A drop of bright red blood seeped out of Chun Ping'an's glabella, and he suddenly raised a hand, as if he were gesturing to tell someone not to intervene. He then patted his sword-nurturing gourd, and first flew out to hover above the mouth of the gourd as he sneered. "Here's the flying sword you want, should we do some gambling?" A joyful smile appeared on the old man's face as he said, "Very good. I am now certain that you and I must have come from very similar beginnings." After the old man appeared, not only did he lash out with his sword, he stopped in his tracks instead and said, "I have a question for you. Why didn't Zhu Quan and the others help you endure the heavenly tribulation back in Imperial Accompanying City?" Chun Ping'an wiped his left hand over his face, erasing his own smile bit by bit as he revealed, "From the very beginning, I told Sect Master Zhu not to intervene unless you were personally coming after me, even if I were to die from some other cause. Only the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect would agree to such a request, and such a decision would only be made by the current you and the past Gao Cheng. People like us are the ones who deserve to ascend to great heights in this world," the old man remarked with a nod. "I'll be waiting for you in Skeleton Wall City, so make sure you don't perish to anyone else. I'm worried that you'll get cold feet when the time comes, so I suggest you charge straight through the Skeleton Shoal, and don't stop until you reach Skeleton Wall City." The old man cast his gaze approximately toward the southernmost point on the northern complete reed continent, then continued, "I have been alone all this time in my pursuit of the great Tao, and I've finally encountered someone truly after my own heart. Not only have I failed to kill you this time, I've had to expend a soul and a mortal form, but now that I think about it, these losses are not so unacceptable. By the way, you should really thank that girl from the Golden Bell Monastery, and the little water monster behind you. If it weren't for these two inadvertently helping you stabilize your mental state, there's no way you would have been able to make it to this ship no matter how careful you were. Zhu Quan and the others would perhaps have been able to seize the flying sword, but there's no way they would have been able to save your life." The old man swept a sleeve through the air, and the 2 walking dead people on the ship collapsed to the ground as a pair of skeletons. Only now had they truly perished. The old man then reached around his own shoulder to slowly draw the longsword he was carrying on his back. Chun Ping'an remained completely still. "Even if it's just a soul and a mortal form of mine, those 3 unpolished jade-tier cultivators of the Flax Robe sect are unworthy of such spoils," the old man declared, then began slicing through his own neck bit by bit with his sword, all the while staring intently at Chun Ping'an, who didn't seem to be surprised in the slightest by what he was witnessing. "The deity of the verdant bamboo lake dragon palace is even more like me. Once the outcome of our showdown on the Skeleton Shoal is decided, if you are one to have perished, then I'll take you to see what the true underworld looks like. If I am the one to perish, then you can go and take a look for yourself as well, but it's truly very difficult for me to die." As soon as his voice trailed off, his head was completely decapitated from his body by his own doing, and it fell to the ground. The headless body remained standing, resting its hands atop the hilt of the sword as if it were a cane. In the blink of an eye, another isolated small world appeared on the ship, followed by the arrival of 3 Flax Robe sect patriarchs. The 2 male patriarchs went to examine the pair of skeletons using their mystical abilities, while Zhu Quan strode over to Chun Ping'an and sighed. "It's going to be really dangerous for you if you keep this up, Chun Ping'an. I am sharpening my sword with my own evil thoughts. It has no bearing on the world," Chun Ping'an replied. Zhu Quan opened her mouth to say something, but decided against it in the end as she shook her head and turned to look at the headless body. After a long silence, she asked, "Chen Ping'an, will you become a second Gao Cheng?" Chen Ping'an offered no response as he slowly smoothed down his sleeves. Zhu Quan's gaze remained on the headless body as she sighed. "I resent Skeleton Wall City and Gao Cheng with every fiber of my being, but deep down, I must admit that I've always greatly admired Gao Cheng." Chen Ping'an turned to look at the little girl, who was standing completely still in the stagnant river of time. Her complexion was made to appear even darker in contrast with the golden sweet wine robe that she was wearing, and Chen Ping'an was rather amused to see this. When it comes to the darkness of complexion, Pei Qian still takes the cake. "In any case, our flax robe sect owes you a huge favor," Zhu Quan said with a smile. "No, we're merely even now," Chen Ping'an disagreed with a shake of his head. "Are you really going to return to the Skeleton Shoal with us to challenge Gao Cheng?" she asked with a curious look in her eyes. "No, I'll keep him waiting until after I've finished traveling the northern complete reed continent," Chen Ping'an replied with a shake of his head, an answer that Zhu Quan found very amusing. "Can you make it so that she can move?" Chen Ping'an asked as he pointed at the little girl. Zhu Quan nodded in response, and in the blink of an eye, the little girl regained the ability to move. She stared at Chen Ping'an in a momentary daze, then looked around with a confused expression, following which her brows became tightly furrowed once again. Chen Ping'an crouched down with a smile on his face and asked, "Do you want to go find somewhere to stay in the Spring Dew Garden or go and visit my hometown? Can I choose neither one and stay with you instead?" the little girl asked. "I'm afraid not," Chen Ping'an replied with a shake of his head. "If you keep me by your side, you can have sauerkraut fish any time you want," the little girl negotiated in a hopeful manner. Chen Ping'an shook his head yet again. "I'll send you to my hometown. There's a lot of good food and fun things to do there. Perhaps you'll even make some new friends. By the way, I have a friend called Suanxia. He's a traveling hero, and he just so happens to be writing a travel journal. You can tell him your story, and I'm sure he'd be happy to incorporate them into his book." The little girl was very tempted by this proposition. All of a sudden, a thought seemed to have occurred to her, and she began tugging on her white robe, which somehow fit her very well. Ding Tong was gripping the railing of the ship tightly with his hands, and he had no idea how he had ended up here. "Am I about to die?" he asked in a daze. Chen Ping'an pulled out his folding fan, then tapped it over the length of the railing, stretching his arm out to as far as he could reach. Ding Tong turned to look at the people on the second-floor observation deck. Wei Bai of the Iron Worship Residence, Celestial Maiden Qingqing of the Spring Dew Garden, the hideous old woman, and the official immortals who had previously accepted him as one of their own, even though he was a martial artist. At the moment, every single one of them was looking at him with cold expressions. There were also some onlookers on the first floor. Someone flashed him a mocking grin, while someone else gave him a thumbs up. A look of despair appeared on Ding Tong's face as he looked down at the sea of clouds beneath his feet. Chen Ping'an raised a hand, and a streak of golden sword light shot out through the window before rising up into the sky. "Do you know why I haven't made a move on you all this time, even though you're the main perpetrator and I could crush you like an ant? Yet I decided to kill that Vajrabhati tier martial artist when he could have easily remained uninvolved in all of this?" he asked with a smile. "No," Ding Tong replied in a strained voice with a shake of his head. Chen Ping'an cast his gaze into the distance as he explained, "A casual act of evil from a 7th-tier martial artist will have a far more severe impact on the world around them than an act of evil committed by a 5th-tier martial artist with all their might. In the eyes of the weak, you are all almighty deities who can decide the fates of others. That old man declared that there was no bad blood between the two of us, so he would be sure to spare my life. Yet his first punch was already fully intended to be a killing blow. However, that was not unacceptable to me, so I allowed him a second punch, yet he insisted on cutting his own life short with his third punch. As for you, you have to thank that young man up there. If he hadn't stopped you from jumping down to challenge me, then you would have died in that old man's place. Objectively speaking, your actions are not punishable by death. Not to mention Gao Cheng has intentionally left behind a bit of suspense to annoy me. I'll just treat your actions as the demented actions of a man who is influenced by certain mystical abilities, just as I had been some years ago. Principles are not things that can only be espoused by the weak when lamenting their misfortune to others, nor are they things that can be spoken after kneeling and kowtowing. Ding Tong's mind was completely blank, and he was barely even registering Qian Pingan's words. Instead, he was wondering if he should wait for the flying sword to fall and take his life, or if he should grant himself a more dignified death by jumping down from the ship and experiencing what it was like to be a far-roaming tier cultivator for a few seconds before he fell to his demise. Qian Pingan didn't speak any further. You people are just like those horseback warriors who rode up those mountains to their deaths. Along the way, they wouldn't hesitate to barge into a few perceived eyesores and send them flying to their deaths. There are countless obscure wildernesses on the path of life, all of which are great places to commit acts of evil away from the scrutiny of others. There are countless such people everywhere, whether that be in the mortal world, the martial arts world, the officialdoms, or the cultivation world. Their parents and teachers behave this way, and their descendants will also be the same. Truly is a vicious cycle. Why was the little girl in the Golden Bell Monastery of the Locust Flower Nation so dejected and disappointed? It was because if Qian Pingan's true identity and cultivation base were set aside, then the words and actions that he had intentionally displayed would have been completely identical to that of those horseback ruffians. What hurt her the most wasn't Qian Pingan's dullness and pedantry. Instead, it was the attitude that he had displayed when he had uttered the words, "Are you going to compensate me if I'm knocked unconscious and my bookcase is stolen?" In her eyes, she had treated the world and everyone around her with kindness, yet not only had that kindness not been reciprocated, it had been met with hostility from Qian Pingan. However, what was so good and virtuous about her was that even though she had been hurt so deeply, she still felt genuine concern for that foolish and hurtful scholar. Qian Pingan was not able to do the same, so in his eyes, she was a far more virtuous person than him, and was far more worthy of being called a good person. Qian Pingan remained silent as he awaited the return of the flax robe sect cultivators, while simultaneously listening to the voice of his own heart. Qian Pingan pressed the tip of his folding fan against his own heart as he mused to himself, "I was caught off guard this time, but what does that have to do with the flax robe sect? Even I know that it's not like me to blame the flax robe sect for something like this. I've grown accustomed to seeing through the tricks of those beneath me, so now that Gao Chang has shown himself to be slightly outside of my control, I immediately feel resentful and frustrated. If this is how I'm going to be, then I won't make it very far at all in my cultivation, both of power and of the heart. If I can't even get over something like this, then I should just resign myself to be a swordsman and wave goodbye to my dreams of ever becoming a sword immortal." Zhu Quan told him through her mind's lake to meet her deep within the sea of clouds. If they were to isolate the area around the ship into a small world once again, then its mortal passengers were undoubtedly going to suffer. Once he left the ship, all he would have to do was travel southward 5 kilometers to reach her. Qian Pingan rose to his feet before taking a stride forward, and a streak of golden sword light descended from the heavens, drawing to a halt right beneath his foot. In the blink of an eye, both he and the sword had vanished into thin air. Within the sea of clouds, the 3 flax-robe sect patriarchs had been joined by an elderly Taoist priest dressed in a Taoist robe the style of which had never been seen before, indicating that he wasn't in any of the 3 branches, nor was he a Taoist priest from the heavenly master residence of Mount Longhu. Right as Qian Pingan arrived on the scene atop his flying sword, a middle-aged Taoist priest also broke through the clouds, approaching from afar as he shrank the space beneath his feet, covering several kilometers of distance with just 2 steps. The formation is complete. If Gao Cheng dares to spy on us using some observation mystical ability, then he's going to suffer a little for it. There was a slightly awkward look on Zhu Quan's face, but she still took accountability and said, "It's my fault that I wasn't able to detect any traces of Gao Cheng lingering in that martial artist." The old Taoist priest hesitated momentarily, but he chose not to speak after receiving a head shake from one of the flax-robe sect patriarchs standing beside him. Qian Pingan shook his head as he said, "I was the one who lost to Gao Cheng and was tricked by him. No one else is to blame." Zhu Quan was still holding Zhou Mili in her arms, and at this point, the latter had already fallen asleep. Zhu Quan remained as open and candid as ever as she revealed, "Even after we left, we'd been keeping an eye on the ship just in case we missed something, and sure enough we did. Hence, we overheard your conversation with Gao Cheng. After he left that martial artist's body, a wisp of smoke came out of this little girl's mouth, just like with that martial artist. We presume that Gao Cheng must have tampered with the turtle jelly. Thankfully this time, I can assure you that the most Gao Cheng can do right now is observe us from Skeleton Wall City, and at the very least, he no longer has any tricks concealed in this little girl. For one person, you've completely disregarded the entirety of the Skeleton Shoal and the southern region of the complete Reed continent. If you had weighed up your options carefully before making this decision, then I, as an outsider, wouldn't have been in a place to say anything, yet you've gone and done it without any hesitation, the middle-aged Taoist priest said. He spoke in a neutral and aloof tone, yet he somehow came across as mocking and derisive. You're not very well versed with Taoist teachings, are you? With just a single sentence, Chen Ping'an was almost able to disturb the middle-aged Taoist priest's mental state. If you're so sentimental and empathetic that you're willing to hand over such a precious treasure just for a little water monster that you picked up on a whim, then all evildoers would be eagerly lining up to meet you, the middle-aged Taoist priest scoffed. Chen Ping'an pulled out his folding fan, then gently tapped it against his own head as he asked, "Is your cultivation base superior to Du Mao's? I don't know exactly what happened back then, but given that your cultivation base would have only been inferior to what it is now at the time, the only way you could have possibly survived a battle against an Ascension-tier cultivator would have been by relying on that secret backer of yours," the middle-aged Taoist priest sneered. "No wonder you dared to threaten Gao Cheng and proclaim that you'll travel to Skeleton Wall City to give him a nasty surprise. Do you need me to send a message to him via flying sword? My backer wouldn't even bother to spare a glance at someone as pathetic as you. How does that make you feel?" Chen Ping'an asked with a smug smile. The middle-aged Taoist priest's expression instantly darkened slightly, but a carefree smile then appeared on his face as he replied, "It doesn't make me feel anything, I just don't like the look of you. You're a half-baked swordsman who Gao Cheng sees as someone very similar to himself, yet you have quite the powerful backer. On top of that, you're very wise and calculating for someone so young, and Gao Cheng has always been an exceptional judge of character. If word were to spread that you had an amicable conversation with Gao Cheng, during which he finished an entire flagon of wine that you gave him, then you'll surely become a household name in all of the cultivating sects of the northern complete Reed continent overnight." Chen Ping'an tapped his folding fan against the palm of his hand as he said, "You can be quiet now. I only granted you the honor of speaking to me in light of your ties with sect leader Zhu. But you've used up your quota and no longer have the privilege of speaking to me. Care for a spar?" the middle-aged Taoist priest challenged. "Don't you think you're a big shot? Why not put your money where your mouth is? Seeing as your master treated me to that cup of 1,000-year-old peach syrup tea, I'll say one more thing to you," Chen Ping'an said. The middle-aged Taoist priest waited for a moment, but Chen Ping'an remained silent as he gazed upon him with a sympathetic expression. Only then did the Taoist priest realize that Chen Ping'an had just said the one more thing that he proclaimed he would say. Zhu Quan was feeling a little concerned. She was truly worried that the two of them would get into a fight at this rate. If that were to happen, it wouldn't be like her to remain a passive bystander, but which side was she supposed to help? Alternatively, would she have to play the role of mediator? Perhaps she could put an end to their fight by beating them up herself. After all, everyone knew that she was a far better fighter than mediator, so they would just interpret that as her way of mediation. "Don't worry, this is a good thing for both Chen Ping'an and this disciple of mine," the elderly Taoist priest said. Zhu Quan heaved a faint sigh then said, "Chen Ping'an, seeing as you've already figured it out, I won't bother with any introductions. Both of these exalted Taoist masters come from the small mystery capital temple of the malicious Ghost Valley. I was the one who invited them to come here. As you're aware, our Flax Robe sect is not short on capable fighters, but when it comes to dealing with powerful spirits like Gao Cheng, we require the assistance of these Taoist masters." Chen Ping'an nodded in response. According to what Zhang Shangzhen had told him, the elderly Taoist priest from the small mystery capital temple was most likely Yang Ningxing's temporary Tao guardian. He was the abbot of the small mystery capital temple, and he had stayed for an entire night on the cliff by the suspension bridge for fear that Chen Ping'an would kill Yang Ningxing. As for that cup of 1,000-year-old peach syrup tea delivered to him by that deity clad in golden armor, Chen Ping'an didn't know if that given to him by the old abbot on a whim or if were a form of hospitality similar to what had been displayed by Gao Cheng. At the moment, He knew far too little about the small mystery capital temple to be able to make an educated guess about the old abbot's true intentions. Qian Ping'an took a glance at the sound-asleep Zhou Mili in Zhu Quan's arms, then said, "I'll have to trouble you to do me a favor, sect leader Zhu. Not because I don't trust the Flax Robe sect and the small mystery capital temple, but instead because I don't trust Gao Cheng. Once you deliver this girl to the Dragon Spring Prefecture, please request Wei Bo of Cloud Drape Mountain to help me find someone by the name of Cui Dongshan. Tell him that I want Cui Dongshan to return to Downtrodden Mountain right away, and examine the girl's soul." Qian Ping'an had full trust in the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect, but he really didn't have much trust in the abbot of the small mystery capital temple, and his foolish and short-tempered nascent tier disciple. The middle-aged Taoist priest's brows furrowed slightly. He had heard of Wei Bo. As the northern mountain god of the Greatly Empire, he was on the cusp of reaching the unpolished jade tier, and there were already some phenomena arising within the territory of the northern mountain, heralding his imminent breakthrough. Zhu Quan had a very straightforward personality, and she asked in a direct manner, "Is this Cui Dongshan capable?" "He's the most capable person I know in this regard," Qian Ping'an replied. The old abbot smiled as he said, "You can never be too careful. I can only say that I've done my best and have failed to detect anything amiss in this little girl. However, if something has slipped my notice, then the consequences could be catastrophic. Hence, it can never be a bad idea to have her examined by an extra pair of eyes." "I'm glad you're so open-minded, esteemed abbot," Qian Ping'an said with a smile. The old abbot smiled and offered no response. Seeing as the conversation was wrapping up, Zhu Quan said, "Please go ahead, abbot. I'm going to stay for a bit and discuss some private matters with Qian Ping'an." The middle-aged Taoist priest withdrew the formation, and even though he and Qian Ping'an didn't see eye to eye, the latter had to admit that his eyes had been opened to the profundity and venom of the mystical abilities used by powerful cultivators. Prior to this, he had never known that one ran the risk of incurring harm upon oneself just by using an observation ability to spy on others. With that, the two Taoist priests of the small mystery capital temple departed with the other two Flax Robe sect patriarchs. Zhu Quan cut straight to the chase as she said, "The abbot's eldest disciple has always been one to make abrasive remarks, and I've been itching to beat him up for a very long time. As you saw, his personality isn't that great, but he's very capable in battle, and he's mastered the majority of the small mystery capital temple's most powerful mystical abilities. You can just ignore him for now, and once you attain the power to do so, come back and beat him to within an inch of his life." Qian Ping'an put away his folding fan and flew over to Zhu Quan's side atop his flying sword, then reached out to take Zhou Mili from her. Zhu Quan handed her off to Qian Ping'an as she jibed, "How does a man like you know how to cradle a child? Did you learn from Jiang Shangshan? Are you hoping that you'll be able to pick up some girls by making it appear as if you're good with children?" Qian Ping'an sat down with his legs crossed as he cradled the still sound-asleep Zhou Mili in his arms. There was a faint smile on his face, but a hint of melancholy in his eyes as he said, "When I was a child, I had to cradle and babysit other children every day." Zhu Quan took a glance at Qian Ping'an, and it seemed that he was telling the truth. She sat down on the sea of clouds, and in a rare display of timidity, she wanted to say something, but was rather hesitant. Qian Ping'an was still looking down at Zhou Mili, but he seemed to have somehow gleaned Zhu Quan's thoughts and he said, "I've always felt like you're the smartest person in the entire Skeleton Shoal, sect leader Zhu. It's just you can't be bothered to think and do things." Zhu Quan nodded as she replied, "I believe you. Having said that, I would say that I'm quite familiar with you at this point, yet even I find myself doubting the authenticity of the words that you spoke to Gao Cheng. By extension, I can't help but wonder if you were being genuine with the old abbot and his disciple." "I was being genuine and earnest at the very beginning," Qian Ping'an revealed. "I was already prepared for the worst-case scenario. If I had failed to protect this girl, and she died on the ship, then I would have to avenge her. It's as simple as that. As for the rest, it was just a process of prodding and probing each other, with both of us trying to catch a deeper glimpse into the heart of the other. Gao Cheng is also concerned, so he watched me the entire way, only to discover that I intentionally showed him everything that he saw. He's already lost twice, and he's afraid that if he loses a third time, then he won't even have the will to fight for Little Capital anymore. Essentially, it was all just a mental tug of war." Chen Ping'an tapped the knuckles of his fingers against his sword-nurturing gourd as if he were knocking on a door, and first flew out from within before hovering right beside his shoulder, putting on a rare display of tame obedience. Gao Chang was naturally also telling the truth in some parts, Chen Ping'an said. For example, he was being truthful when he remarked on how similar we were. Both of us had to gamble over and over again to slowly straighten our backs, which had previously been crushed under such immense weight that they were on the verge of snapping. From there we ascended higher and higher. You have a great deal of respect for Gao Chang, but that doesn't hamper your ability to kill him without any hesitation, and you feel as if you owe me a massive favor just because I was able to make him expend a soul and a mortal form. Similarly, I regard Gao Chang as a sworn enemy, but that doesn't hamper my ability to see and acknowledge his various strengths. That's the right way to look at things, Zhu Quan said. Everything needs to be broken down into its constituent parts and looked at through an objective lens. There are many secrets of our sect that would be inappropriate for me to reveal to an outsider like you, but I can tell you that Gao Chang is a very difficult opponent to deal with. Even if I were to completely erase Gao Chang from existence someday and smash Skeleton Wall City to bits, I would be sure to bring out a flagon of fine wine and pay homage to the foot soldier Gao Chang of old, then pay homage to Skeleton Wall City Lord Gao Chang, then finally pay homage to Gao Chang for honing the Tao heart of our flax robe sect. For some reason, there are always people who feel like it's necessary to be hostile to all evildoers, and that this is a heroic and virtuous quality, Chen Ping'an remarked. Just as there are many people who like to look outward when it's time to look inward, only to look inward when it's time to look outward. Zhu Quan was silent for a moment, then slapped a hand heavily down onto Chen Ping'an's shoulder as she demanded, "Give me some wine. I want 2 flagons, one more than you gave to Gao Chang. Once I've had some wine, I'll be able to espouse some exquisite rhetoric that'll have you gawking at me in admiration." Chen Ping'an pulled out 2 flagons of wine and handed them to Zhu Quan, then cautioned, "Make sure to dissipate the aroma of wine as you're drinking. Otherwise, the smell could wake her up, and as soon as she sees me, she'll start begging to stay with me again. She's been yearning for my wine for quite some time now. Also, you can tell her about the turtle jelly if you want. Just be direct and straightforward with her. She's actually a very brave girl, and that heart of hers can't conceal any evil thoughts or intentions." Zhu Quan finished all of the wine in the flagon in one go, leaving not even a single drop behind. However, the way she had tipped her head back to drink was far from efficient, and she had to have leaked at least 20% of the wine. "You really have to change this wine-drinking habit of yours, sect leader Zhu. You're almost spilling more than you drink," Chen Ping'an said in an exasperated manner. "You already gave me the wine, so it's mine to drink however I want," Zhu Quan countered. Chen Ping'an cast his gaze into the distance as he smiled and said, "You make a great friend, sect leader Zhu. But if you were someone's business partner, that person would wish they never knew you." A serious look appeared on Zhu Quan's face as she said, "The true strength of a cultivator doesn't lie in how harmoniously they can coexist with this world. Instead, it's dependent on how much they've changed the world around them outside of their pursuit for the great Tao." Perhaps it's a bit of a cold admission to make, but regardless of whether the outcome is good or bad and their intentions were good or evil, as long as they've drastically changed the world around them, they are strong. That is something that we must concede. One can only be considered truly strong if they still dare to challenge such people even after acknowledging their strength, Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. Zhu Quan also nodded in response, then removed the clay seal on a new flagon of wine, and this time she was far less wasteful, only taking small sips of wine at a time. It wasn't that her personality had changed, this was simply how she had always been. When there was an abundance of wine, she would throw her head back to drink and throw caution to the wind, but when there was only a little wine, she would drink in a much slower and more meticulous fashion. Chen Ping'an turned to Zhu Quan with a smile as he said, "A student of mine once said something very similar to what you said just now. He said that the true strength of a nation lies in their ability to fix mistakes, not their ability to conceal mistakes." "I don't keep up with the affairs of the mortal world," Zhu Quan said with a smile. "Dealing with the malicious Ghost Valley and Gao Chang is already enough to keep my hands full for a lifetime. Having said that, in the future, Du Wenxi and Pang Lanqi will be sure to surpass me in this regard, so you can look forward to that." Zhu Quan heaved a long sigh then said, "There are some things that don't quite feel appropriate to say, but they'll weigh on me if I don't say them, so I'm just going to get it off my chest. If I keep it to myself, I'll have to suffer alone, so I'd rather have you suffer with me. You said you were going to give Skeleton Wall City a nasty surprise. You said that at the beginning, so I take it to be true. I can't figure out how you would go about doing that, but I don't really care. Setting aside everything else, you're quite a reliable kid, and you can be ruthless to others, but you're most ruthless to yourself. Given that preface, you really can't blame that small mystery capital temple Taoist priest for worrying that you'll become a second Gao Chang or forge an alliance with him. That's an understandable point of view, but it's not one that I accept, Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. Back when Gao Chang brought up the turtle jelly to try and extort you into handing over your flying sword, you really were fooled by him, weren't you? Zhu Quan asked. Chen Ping'an nodded in response without any hesitation. I was. Hence, from now on, I'm going to be more mindful of the potential tricks an unpolished jade tier cultivator can play outside of battle. In that case, did you really decide in an instant to sacrifice first in order to save the girl? Zhu Quan asked. Chen Ping'an nodded once again as he replied. I did. If the girl dies, where would I go to find her? Even if Gao Chang hadn't been lying to me, and he really did possess the ability to seize first on the spot and transport it directly to Skeleton Wall City, so what? I really wanted Gao Chang to take first at the time. That way, I'd be able to do something that I've never had the chance to do over the years, but at the same time, it's something that everyone really likes to do and regards as completely justified. Chen Ping'an gently passed Zhou Mili back to Zhu Quan, then slowly rose to his feet before flicking his wrists, upon which his sleeves quickly rolled up on their own. He stood atop Sword Immortal above the sea of clouds with an intense look in his eyes as he said, if Gao Chang had managed to take first, then he would have driven me into a corner and left me with no other choice. I would be placed in a very interesting situation then. What do you think I would do then? Take a guess, sect leader Zhu. Zhu Quan held Zhou Mili in her arms as she also rose to her feet, then smiled as she conceded, I have no idea. First, I would call upon a man by the name of Li Er. He's a 10th tier martial artist, and I would redeem a favor that he owes me by requesting him to come to the Skeleton Shoal. I would also instruct my student, who's only a nascent tier cultivator for now, to also come to the Skeleton Shoal to assist his teacher. I would go and beg for help, something that I've never done before. I would implore an old martial artist who's also at the pinnacle of the 10th tier to leave his bamboo building and stand up for me, someone who's technically half a disciple of his. Seeing as I'm already begging for help, I may as well completely set my pride aside and go all the way. As my final ally, I would call upon a swordsman by the name of Zhua Yu. I would tell him that his junior brother is about to die and implore him to save me. When that time comes, I'm sure Gao Chang will have his hands full. Zhu Quan was the leader of the Flax Robe sect, someone who dared to challenge even the likes of Gao Chang. Yet in this instant she felt a hint of fear. She could sense a pure aura rising up from Chen Ping'an's body, one that had nothing to do with good or evil. Chen Ping'an raised a hand up high, then stomped a foot down forcefully, causing Sword Immortal to plummet down into the clouds below as he continued. If Gao Chang still manages to survive even after all that, or it's revealed that he has an Ascension tier backer or two, then I'll leave it at that, and I won't beg anyone else for help. His voice trailed off here as he burst into laughter, and in the end, he seemed to murmur to himself, I have a sword that will be with me through thick and thin. Sword Immortal was just about to fly back up to him, but for some reason it didn't dare to approach him, lingering far away on the edge of the sea of clouds. After his laughter died down, tears suddenly began to flow down Chen Ping'an's face as he lowered his head to look down at his rolled-up sleeves. He slowly raised his left hand, then grabbed tightly onto his right sleeve as he choked through his tears. Mr. Qi died for me, so I am the one who can least afford to disappoint him. How could I do this? Anyone can do this, but not me, not Chen Ping'an of Clay Vase Alley. Zhu Quan was silent for a long while, then jibed. Don't get ahead of yourself. You're still not a wing formation tier martial artist yet, so you could still fall to your death if you're not careful. In the absence of Sword Immortal beneath his feet, Chen Ping'an discovered that the sea of clouds down below had become as solid as a white jade slab, no doubt a result of Zhu Quan's mystical abilities. Thanks, he said with a smile. Do you feel a little better now that you've gotten all of that off your chest? Zhu Quan asked. Much better. Chen Ping'an replied as he interlaced his fingers behind his head. Zhu Quan shook her head as she sighed. Venting like this every once in a while isn't a permanent solution. If you keep this up, you're going to be crushed under the weight of your own mental burden someday. One's energy, essence, and spirit are not like one's fist intent. The latter can be hammered down to the size of a mustard seed, at which point every punch that is thrown will be imbued with almighty power. In contrast, energy, essence, and spirit must be nurtured. Otherwise, they will be unsustainable. Having said that, I suppose the constant mental burden that you carry with you is what's kept you alive up to this point. If I possessed the same cultivation base as you and were thrust into your shoes, I would have already died several dozen times over in the face of Gao Cheng's tireless pursuit. This is why I admire you, sect leader Zhu. The pursuit of the great Tao is an arduous endeavor, yet you've managed to remain true to yourself and make the pursuit much simpler than most, Chen Ping'an said in an earnest manner. There were very few cultivators of Zhu Quan's caliber that would have the humility and candor to admit their mistake, and that they owed someone a massive favor, particularly after they had already done everything in their power to do the best job possible. Zhu Quan waved a dismissive hand as she scoffed. Quit trying to suck up to me. I don't have any more female heavenly official mural replicas to give you. I'm going to lay down for a bit. Please don't take it as a gesture of disrespect, sect leader Zhu, Chen Ping'an said with a smile. I'll be fine as long as I have some wine, Zhu Quan replied as she extended a hand. Chen Ping'an was just about to pull some wine out of his minimization treasure when Zhu Quan demanded. It has to be good wine. Don't try to placate me with ordinary rice wine. I've grown up my entire life in the cultivation world, so I can't stomach the wine of mortals. Chen Ping'an was left in a rather difficult predicament. He didn't have much immortal wine in his minimization treasure, and if Zhu Quan kept asking for more, then he would run out very soon. However, her demands had to be satisfied, and Chen Ping'an went above and beyond, pulling out 3 flagons of immortal wine of different varieties, namely osmanthus wine from Old Dragon City, Wellwater immortal wine from the Wasptail Ferry Station, and Crocaw wine from Bamboo Scroll Lake. He tossed the flagons of wine at Zhu Quan one by one, and despite her remarks of how this was too much for her to accept, her actions didn't match her words at all, and she eagerly tucked 2 of the flagons up her sleeve, leaving one out to drink. Chen Ping'an laid down on the solidified sea of clouds, much as he had laid down on the green bamboo corridor in Cui Dongshan's residence in Mountain Cliff Academy. Neither of those were his home, but they were like homes away from home. He was truly feeling a little weary from his journey. Zhu Quan sat down beside him, then gently set Zhou Mili down beside herself. She gently swept a sleeve over Zhou Mili, serving as a barrier to shield her from the wind above the clouds, ensuring that she continued to sleep soundly. Zhu Quan sipped on some wine as she sighed. If the situation really had spiraled to the point where you had to call upon all of those aforementioned allies, then Gao Cheng would have been backed into a corner. If he had decided to bring Skeleton Wall City and the malicious Ghost Valley down with him, then not only would Garment Mountain have been completely destroyed, the same would have applied to the Skeleton Shoal as well, and the water fortune of Swang River would have surely been implicated too. Additionally, the baleful energy of the malicious Ghost Valley would have spread upstream to kill countless people in those upstream nations. It would have truly been a calamity. Sect leader Zhu, do you know how many people pass through Mural City each day? How many people visit the Helpless Pass Market? How many sects there are in the Skeleton Shoal? And the populations of the Swang River's upstream nations? Chen Ping'an asked. Why would I know all of that? Zhu Quan asked. I can't be bothered. I have to cultivate while also performing my duties as a sect leader, and it's really exhausting. While passing through the Skeleton Shoal I calculated, I asked, and I read books, so I know the answers to all of those questions, Chen Ping'an said. What is going on in that head of yours, Chen Ping'an? Zhu Quan sighed in an exasperated manner. Chen Ping'an folded his hands beneath the back of his head as he said, After leaving Wood Garment Mountain, I felt like everyone was Gao Cheng, and after arriving in that ghost estate in Imperial Accompanying City, I felt like everyone was Chen Ping'an, so I'm really tired as well. Then why did you come to the Northern Complete Reed Continent? Zhu Quan asked in a puzzled manner. This place is renowned for its peril and unpredictability. If you're so afraid of death, why couldn't you have delayed your trip until your cultivation base was a bit more advanced? Also, you don't have enough life-saving tricks up your sleeve. Fundamentally, you're still a pure martial artist. So the only way you can open up any distance between yourself and your assailants is by using inch movement talismans and that pseudo-celestial sword of yours. Even if we discount cultivators of the upper 5 tiers like myself, any Earth immortal could easily travel thousands of kilometers without breaking a sweat. If you're unable to get close to them and end the battle quickly, then you'll eventually be worn down from a distance and killed. You know what? Forget it. Why am I trying to talk sense into a complete nutcase like you? Not only was a Dao robe wearer, he was wearing 2 at once. On top of that, he was carrying a sword nurturing gourd, within which were 2 flying swords that weren't even bonded to him. He could impersonate a lower 5 tiers cultivator one moment, then a swordsman the next, and the rest of the time he could pose as a 4th or 5th tier martial artist. He had so many tricks and red herrings up his sleeve, and given his fist techniques, inch movement talismans, and flying swords, the average golden core tier cultivator really would be no match for him if they were caught off guard and allowed him to get close. On top of that, his capacity for taking a beating was nothing short of incredible. Those punches from that Vajrabhati tier martial artist on the ship had bounced off him as if they had been thrown by an infant. Even Zhu Quan was feeling tempted to attack Chen Ping'an, just to test out the limits of his durability. I haven't actually reached the Vajrabhati tier yet, Chen Ping'an suddenly said. I suffered some very heavy losses during the heavenly tribulation in Imperial accompanying city, having been forced to use up almost all of my best talismans, but I also benefited immensely in terms of bodily refinement, even more so than from my training in the bamboo building back home. After all, while taking those punches, I'm aware that the old man isn't going to kill me, but the heavenly tribulation had no such reservations. Even so, I still wasn't quite able to break my Vajrabhati tier bottleneck. My first shortcoming was that I was unable to manifest a hero's gall pill, and my second shortcoming was that I had bitten off more than I could chew and tried to learn too many fist techniques at once, so all of those fist techniques were conflicting with one another. You're telling me you're able to do all of this while still only being a 6th tier martial artist? Zhu Quan exclaimed. Chen Ping'an nodded in response. In that case, all of the 7th tier martial artists of our northern complete reed continent should just go kill themselves. Zhu Quan exclaimed in exasperation. That's not exactly fair, Chen Ping'an countered. Otherwise, all of the pure martial artists under the heavens below the mountain summit tier should go kill themselves, with the sole exception of Chao Ci. Zhu Quan took a swig of wine then said, even someone as oblivious as me has heard of Chao Ci. Do you know him or something? Chen Ping'an sat up as he nodded and replied, I lost 3 consecutive battles to him on the Sword Qi Great Wall. Zhu Quan's eyes widened in astonishment. That's a bit of an embarrassing admission to make, Chen Ping'an said with a bashful expression, but a resilient smile then quickly appeared on his face as he declared, but that's fine. As long as I remain within 1 tier behind Chao Ci, and don't allow the gap between us to widen to 2 tiers, I have chances of catching up and surpassing him in this lifetime. Zhu Quan knew that he had misunderstood her. How many young martial artists under the heavens could convince Chao Ci to have 3 consecutive battles against them? It was just like how the Lord of White Emperor City spared extra games for no one but Cui Dongshan. Of course, what was even more impressive was Qi Jingchun, the scholar that had made the Lord of White Emperor City voluntarily leave his city, just to be able to play a game of Go against him. The scholarly sage branch had very few people, but all of them were incredible in their own way. Qi Jingchun had made a name for himself by single-handedly bearing the full brunt of that catastrophic calamity. Due to the fact that the Skeleton Shoal was situated in a southernmost region of the northern complete reed continent, while the Great Li Empire was in the northernmost region of the eastern treasured Vile continent, Zhu Quan had actually caught a glimpse of what had happened at the time from Wood Garment Mountain. Then there was the swordsman who was very late to pick up the way of the sword, but had since surpassed almost all of the swordsmen under the heavens. He was very enigmatic and clearly preferred to keep to himself, but some years ago, he had once appeared over the sea near the northern complete reed continent. At the time, 4 sword immortals had gone to confront him in succession, and 3 of them had returned in silence after their encounter. The only one who spoke of their encounter was the first swordsman, also the most powerful of all of the continent's unpolished jade tier swordsmen. Following his return, he declared to the entire continent, "Don't bother going if you're at the unpolished jade tier or below. Make sure you're at least at the immortal tier if you don't want to make an absolute fool out of yourself. There were many more stories pertaining to the scholarly sage's disciples. The second sage's branch was teeming with bright talents, and in comparison, the scholarly sage's branch barely had anyone, but it had no shortage of stories, and the northern complete reed continent was perhaps the continent that was most fond of the scholarly sage's branch in this world. The reason for this was very simple. All of the scholarly sage's disciples were extremely formidable in battle. In particular, Zhu Quan had immense admiration for Zhuo Yu. He never wasted time with words, and his temper was so short that he put even the swordsmen of the northern complete reed continent to shame. She had heard that he was quite refined and handsome in appearance, but beneath that civilized facade was an absolute demon. All of the sword immortals of the northern complete reed continent were lamenting the fact that someone like him was so reclusive and didn't reside on the northern complete reed continent. Otherwise, they would be able to go to him for sparring every day. Zhu Quan grinned as she wiped the back of her hand across her lips. Meeting him would truly be a dream come true. As for the misunderstanding, Zhu Quan couldn't be bothered to clear it up. If Chen Ping'an misconstrued her stunned silence as an expression of ridicule in response to the revelation that he had lost 3 consecutive battles to Chao Ci, then he could think as he pleased. Hold on a second. Zhu Quan turned to Chen Ping'an with a menacing expression as she asked, "Who did you just say your senior brother was? And which Mr. Qi were you talking about?" Initially, she had been momentarily stunned by Chen Ping'an's aura and the mention of the 10th-tier martial artist that owed him a favor, the student who was temporarily only a nascent-tier cultivator, and that martial artist at the pinnacle of the 10th tier who was technically half a master of his. On top of that, she had been distracted by her concern over the possibility that Chen Ping'an's mental state would crumble on the spot, but now that she had a chance to process what she had just heard, how did Zhuo Yu end up becoming your senior brother? What are you talking about, sect leader Zhu? Are you drunk? Chen Ping'an asked with an innocent and puzzled expression. Zhu Quan stood up with a warm smile on her face, then sat down right next to Chen Ping'an as she requested in a quiet voice. Can you get that senior brother of yours, the swordsman, to come and visit my wood garment mountain? Tell him that someone wants to treat him to some wine, and that if he doesn't want to come to wood garment mountain, then that's fine, I can go out to meet him at Seed instead. All you need to do is arrange a time and place of meeting for us, and I'll go meet him with Pang Shanling. Once there, I'll stand by his side and get Pang Shanling to draw a portrait of us. Oh my goodness, I'm getting embarrassed. Chen Ping'an massaged his own glabella in exasperation. If you feel embarrassed, then don't make the request in the first place. Don't play dumb with me. Zhu Quan snapped. Just answer me straight up. Is it a yes or is it a hell yes? Chen Ping'an could feel a headache coming on, and he decided to come clean with Zhu Quan as he revealed. He doesn't think I have the right to be his junior brother. He told me that to my face. That's why I told you earlier that I have to go and beg him for his help. There's no guarantee that he'll help me even if I beg. Zhu Quan swung a frustrated backhand at Chen Ping'an, who leaned back to evade the swat, only straightening back up once Zhu Quan's hand had passed over his head. Zhu Quan withdrew her hand in a sheepish manner, then offered, "How about I return your wine to you?" "I can't make any promises," Chen Ping'an replied with a shake of his head. "You're such a pain in the ass. No wonder Zhuo Yu doesn't acknowledge you as his junior brother." Zhuo Yu complained. However, in the wake of this revelation, Zhu Quan finally understood why Chen Ping'an had said what he did to the abbot's disciple. If Zhuo Yu were to come to the northern complete reed continent, he really wouldn't spare a glance at that nascent-tier Taoist priest, not even half a glance in fact. It wasn't because of the drastic disparity in cultivation base between them. Zhuo Yu wasn't the type of person to pay extra attention to someone just because they were an ascension-tier cultivator, nor was he the type of person to completely disregard someone just because they were immortal. This made Zhuo Yu unique among swordsmen of Middle-earth Divine Continent, and it was the reason why he was so revered by the swordsmen of the northern complete reed continent. Zhu Quan took a glance at the sky, then grumbled, "Ah shoot, I have to go. I didn't think I would stay and chat for this long. Those 2 uncle masters of mine are so eager to marry me off that they would gladly hand me over to any man that would take me, then revere him like a bodhisattva. Those 2 old bastards are definitely going to think that I had a fling with you here. My reputation will be ruined. Everyone on Wood Garment Mountain will be teasing me about preferring younger men." Qian Ping'an was even more panicked than Zhu Quan upon hearing this, and he hurriedly rose to his feet and took a couple of steps backward as he implored in a serious manner. Please, please, please squash those rumors before they have a chance to spread, sect leader Lan. Otherwise, I'm never going to visit Wood Garment Mountain again for as long as I live. Care to join me for some tea at my luminous jade cliff? Lu Jiqing asked. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding between us, Sword Immortal Lu, Qian Ping'an said with a smile. I wouldn't even dare visit your luminous jade cliff, much less have tea with you there. I much prefer the spring on the luminous jade cliff over the lightning cloud of my Golden Crow Palace, Lu Jiqing said. Ah, in that case I'd be more than happy to go, Qian Ping'an said with an enlightened expression. Are we going on foot or by flight? Up to you, Lu Jiqing replied with a smile. Qian Ping'an cast his gaze toward the young woman who was the direct disciple of the Spring Dew Garden's Golden Courtier Earth Immortal and said, Please take us there by boat, Celestial Maiden. The young woman naturally raised no objections. It was a massive honor and privilege to be able to travel with Lu Jiqing by boat to the luminous Jade Cliff, not to mention that this young man was also an esteemed guest of the Spring Dew Garden. Even though he had only received by a single person in the form of Song Lanqiao, the fact that he was able to stay in such a prestigious residence, coupled with the fact that Lu Jiqing had personally come here to invite him for tea, clearly indicated that he was a very important figure in his own regard. The luminous Jade Cliff was outside the Sea of Jade, and this had been intentionally arranged by the Spring Dew Garden's ancestral hall in order to prevent any altercations between the two sword immortals. The boat rose up into the air, and the jade forest down below resembled a stunning sea of jade, presenting a breathtaking sight to behold. This time she didn't brew any tea for the two guests, not wanting to flaunt her meager tea brewing skills in front of a connoisseur like Lu Jiqing. Upon docking at the luminous Jade Cliff, Qian Ping'an and Luing disembarked from the boat, and the former asked in a curious manner, Do you not know the rules here, Sword Immortal Lu? What rules? Lu Jiqing asked in a puzzled manner. The guest is to tip the Celestial Maiden a lesser heat coin for her fairy services, Qian Ping'an said. The young woman had no idea what he was talking about. However, Lu Jiqing immediately took Qian Ping'an's word as fact, tossing her a lesser heat coin, which hovered in the air directly in front of her as he said, Pardon me for my past ignorance. He then turned back to Qian Ping'an and led the way forward as he said, Not far up ahead is the bamboo tube spring on the luminous Jade Cliff. Qian Ping'an looked around as he asked, I heard that you purchased the entire luminous Jade Cliff from the Spring Dew Garden. Is that right, Sword Immortal Lu? Lu Jiqing nodded in response. I purchased ownership rights of the cliff for 500 years for 5 grain rain coins, and over 200 years of the 500-year term has already passed. Qian Ping'an turned to the young woman as he said, You can go back without me. I know the way back to the Sea of Bamboo. The young woman nodded in response, and after a long hesitation, she decided not to say anything for fear of souring the mood of these two esteemed guests. Upon her return, she would discuss with her master whether she should accept his inexplicably obtained lesser heat coin. The talismanic boats that were used to ferry esteemed guests in the Spring Dew Garden had been crafted by the High Zenith Palace for exorbitant sums, and not only were the boats very elegant in form and appearance, poetic phrases would appear on their surface whenever they passed through places with an abundance of spiritual energy. If a guest spotted a phrase to their liking, they could take those characters and imprint them onto a fan or the page of a book, and it was quite a popular activity for guests to pass the time while traveling by boat. The Spring Dew Garden had always been happy to see guests take characters from the talismanic boats, and Qian Ping'an had already been informed of this by Song Lanqiao, but at the time, he had felt too embarrassed to claim any characters for himself. However, he had no such qualms when traveling with Lu Jiqing, gleefully claiming some characters for himself before imprinting them to one side of his fan. The two young sword immortals walked side by side down the small stone path toward the spring, and Qian Ping'an unfurled his folding fan, gently shaking it to watch the newly imprinted characters on its surface ripple like water plants. We're here, Lu Jiqing declared. On the edge of the luminous Jade Cliff was a thatched pergola, with a thatched cottage situated not far away. Within the pergola was a table and some teaware, and at the foot of the cliff was a spring with water so clear that one could easily see the glistening pebbles on the bottom. Qian Ping'an sat down across from Lu Jiqing, then closed his folding fan with a smile as he said, We can skip the tea. How can I help you today, Sword Immortal Lu? Even if you don't feel like tea, I'm still going to have some, Lu Jiqing said with a smile. With one hand, Lu Jiqing inscribed the characters for True Fire onto the table, and the two characters glowed a radiant gold. The strokes of the characters quickly came together to form a pair of red, fiery flood dragons that circled around and intertwined with each other on the table. With a gentle sweep of his sleeve, Lu Jiqing lifted several liters of water out of the spring, which formed an orb that flew toward the table. The water quickly began to heat up while he prepared a teacup, and moments later, he plucked out a few tea leaves from a jar before gently tossing them into the cup. At this point, the spring water had already reached a boil, and a thin stream of it flowed into the teacup at his behest, filling the cup to precisely 70% full. Lu Jiqing raised his teacup to his lips before taking a sip, and Qian Pingyan suddenly declared, "I'll have a cup as well." Lu Jiqing smiled as he pulled out a teacup for Qian Pingyan, then filled it before gently pushing it forward, sending it sliding over the table to him. Qian Pingyan took a sip, then nodded in approval as he remarked, "You are the second-best tea brewer that I've met, Sword Immortal Lu." Lu Tai was naturally the one who claimed the spot. "If the opportunity arises, you can bring the one above me to visit my luminous jade cliff," Lu Jiqing said with a smile. Qian Pingyan set down his teacup then asked, "Even though you didn't show yourself back in the Golden Crow Palace, I'm sure you sensed what I was doing, so why didn't you stop me?" Lu Jiqing had already brought his teacup to his lips, but he heaved a faint sigh as he set it down onto the table again and asked, "What good would that have done? I would have stopped you and then what? We engage in a senseless battle? I have no interest in doing something like that. Ever since I reached the Golden Courtier, the swordsmen of my Golden Crow Palace have stepped out of line far too many times, fearing no repercussions because they have a Golden Courtier patriarch. Unfortunately, I'm not good at dealing with interpersonal affairs. I've always seen the lightning cloud as an eyesore, as is the case with that Dao partner of my nephew disciples. I'm also not a fan of the way that my juniors like Jin Yu do things, but all I could do was turn a blind eye so that none of it would affect my mental state." Qian Pingyan nodded as he said, "Your contrasting mindset compared with the other cultivators of the Golden Courtier is the key to why you've been able to rise above them and reach the Golden Courtier. However, it's very likely also the reason why you haven't been able to overcome your Golden Courtier bottleneck to reach the nascent tier. You can temporarily take your mind off your concerns by coming here to drink tea, but it doesn't actually benefit your cultivation." Lu Jiqing smiled upon hearing this, and he raised his cup to take a sip of tea, then said, "I'm sure you saw me in action earlier back in the Yellow Wind Valley of the Deity-Visaged Nation. I dare say that among all of the Golden Courtier swordsmen in the southern region of the northern complete reed continent, my powers rank far closer to the top than to the bottom." Qian Pingyan thought back to the sword strike unleashed by Lu Jiqing, the streak of sword light that had lit up the entire night sky over the Yellow Wind Valley. It was that strike that had severely wounded Patriarch Yellow Wind, to the point that after it was certain that the Golden Crow Palace swordsman had departed, it still ventured out for a meal, even though it was aware that there were still eminent monks of the Deity-Visaged Nation present. Such was its desperation to feast on human flesh and souls to aid in its recuperation. However, all swords are double-edged, and that's where my trouble begins, Lu Jiqing continued. As a swordsman, I've always honed my Dao heart through battle. Back when my cultivation base was much lower, I benefited immensely from this doctrine, progressing rapidly in my cultivation. However, the higher I ascended, the more trouble I encountered. Nascent tier earth immortals that aren't swordsmen are quite rare. As for Golden Courtier cultivators, all of them go into hiding whenever they hear that I'm about to pass through an area, even the demonic cultivators who've committed countless heinous crimes. Either that or they refuse to defend themselves and dare me to kill them or spare them. In the past, I killed 2 such people, the first of whom deserved to die several times over, while the second one was perhaps not so deserving of death. Killing people who refuse to fight does not benefit my cultivation at all, and it quickly became a tiresome cycle of going out in search of opponents, only for them to either hide at the mere mention of my name or refuse to fight. Eventually, I stopped leaving the sect altogether unless it was to protect the juniors of my Golden Crow Palace during their outings or to come here to drink tea. As a result, a breakthrough seems more and more out of reach by the day. This concerned Lu Jiqing's great Dao, so Qian Pingyan offered no remarks, remaining silent as he drank his tea. The tea was abundant with water fortune, and while this paltry amount of spiritual energy was largely inconsequential for someone like Lu Jiqing, whose important acupoints were filled with vast rivers of spiritual energy, this tea was an incredibly potent source of nourishment for a lower 5 tiers cultivator like Chan Ping'an. That's why I decided to invite you to join me for tea. Lu Jiqing continued with a serious expression. I wanted to ask you why and how you unleashed that sword strike outside my Golden Crow Palace. In particular, I want to know how you were able to attain so much clarity in both your heart and your sword. Of course, I won't ask you to reveal any secrets concerning your great Tao, but please tell me what you can. Perhaps your words can spark a flash of enlightenment within me. Given my current bottleneck, even the slightest spark of inspiration could prove to be of immeasurable benefit. Chan Ping'an raised his cup with a smile, then said, just as you said, if I can say something that ignites within you a spark of enlightenment, then those would be some priceless words, yet all you're going to give me in compensation is a cup of tea? Lu Jiqing smiled as he said, you clearly didn't request that cup of tea because you were actually interested in my tea. Instead, you simply wanted another chance to watch me inscribe talismans and channel qi, and I displayed all of that to you without any concealment. Is that not sufficient compensation? Chan Ping'an shook his head as he said, I'm afraid I wasn't able to glean much from your demonstration. The talisman inscription and qi channeling methods of a golden core tier sword immortal are simply beyond me at this current point in time, and I'm sure that even if I were to see it again, it wouldn't do me any good. Lu Jiqing burst into laughter as he pointed at the cliff and the spring beside him as he said, if I can derive some benefit from what you're about to tell me, then I'll give the remaining 300 years of ownership rights I have over the luminous jade cliff to you. How about that? You're free to do with it as if you see fit, whether it be to rent the cliff to the Spring Dew Garden or someone else, or keep it for yourself. Chan Ping'an snapped his folding fan open with a flourish, then began gently fanning himself as he said, I'll have to ask for another cup of tea and we can chat as we drink. When it comes to doing business, we have to first examine each other's character. Once we're both confident in the quality of each other's character, everything else will automatically fall into place. A faint smile appeared on Lu Jiqing's face, and they began doing business, with one of them communicating through their mind's lake, while the other condensed their voice into a line as martial artists did. Around 15 minutes later, Chan Ping'an reached out to request another cup of tea. A stern look appeared on Lu Jiqing's face as he demanded, can you show me a bit of sincerity? Every single word of mine is as sincere as they come. Chan Ping'an replied in a serious manner. Farewell, Lu Jiqing declared with a sweep of his sleeve. Chan Ping'an was silent for a moment, then swept a sleeve through the air, extracting some water from the boiling orb of spring water hovering above the table. He placed 2 drops of spring water in front of himself, using them as 2 points, between which he drew a straight line. He then gently pressed the tip of his finger into the leftmost point of the line before slowly sliding it toward the right, only stopping once he reached the opposite end. There's no need to look at the big picture, just observe some people in a certain place at a certain point in time. Let's say that this line is the small world within which you are situated. As a cultivator who grew up his entire life in the Golden Crow Palace, your mental state is on this end of the line. As you move down the line, you'll encounter the mental states of the other cultivators of your Golden Crow Palace. As you move further and further away from your mental state, you'll encounter the likes of the cruel and violent palace mistress, and the arrogant and uncouth Jian Yu. You see these people as eyesores, but thanks to your cultivation base and seniority, you're able to protect your own mental state and prevent it from being tarnished by others. However, that is the extent of your abilities. Your sole objective is to sharpen your sword, and for that purpose, you're constantly searching for worthy earth immortals to battle. Compared with this lofty objective, you view everything happening right under your nose as trivialities, and you believe that engaging in such matters would only be a waste of your time. Isn't that right? Precisely, Lu Jiqing replied with a nod. Chan Ping'an raised his finger again, pointing toward the end of the line that symbolized Lu Jiqing's mental state, and he suddenly asked, when it comes to sharpening your sword, why not use the whetstones closest to you rather than searching for distant whetstones? Mortals revere those who are able to best others, but cultivators revere those who are able to best themselves. Swordsmen are renowned for possessing the most destructive power out of all cultivators under the heavens. In that case, is there still a need for self-inquisition and cultivation of the heart? Does a swordsman actually need to attain purity and clarity in both their swords and their heart? Qian Pingyan withdrew his hand, then slowly slid his folding fan from the left side of the line to the right as he asked, "Are you able to set your sword on this trajectory until your sword heart is fully illuminated?" Lu Jiqing fell into deep thought. Were you born in the cultivation world? Or did you only embark on the path of cultivation as a child? Qian Pingyan suddenly asked. Lu Jiqing's gaze remained on Qian Pingyan's folding fan as he replied, "I've been in the Golden Crow Palace for as long as I can remember. I've always been cultivating under my master, turning a blind eye to mortal affairs." Qian Pingyan heaved a forlorn sigh, then rose to his feet as he said, "In that case, pretend I didn't say anything. I can only advise you to leave your sect and travel the world more from now on." Lu Jiqing raised a hand, gesturing for Qian Pingyan to remain seated as he said, "While it's true that I strive to avoid entanglements with worldly affairs, I have a decent understanding of human nature, so quit trying to fool me with your little tricks. On an official basis, this luminous jade cliff was sold to me by the Spring Dew Garden, but in reality it was almost a gift, given the heavily discounted price at which it was sold to me. Clearly, you are determined to get your hands on this cliff. The remaining 300 years of ownership rights could be easily sold for twice the sum of 3 grain rain coins that I paid. In fact, if you play your cards well, you could even sell it for as much as 10 grain rain coins." Sure enough, Qian Pingyan hurriedly sat back down as he grinned. Doing business with smart people always makes the process much smoother. "Why are you so fixated on money?" Lu Jiqing asked in a curious manner. "Earning money is very difficult for vagrant cultivators like myself." Qian Pingyan sighed with a forlorn expression. Lu Jiqing shook his head in exasperation, knowing that he wasn't going to get a straight answer out of Qian Pingyan.